Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it because it stayed where it wasn't supposed to. I was sitting in one of those cheap metal lawn chairs in the backyard, the kind that always feel colder than the air at night. It was late, probably around 11:15. I'd let the dog out earlier, locked the back door behind me, and just stayed outside because the house felt stuffy. My name's Nolan Pierce. I lived in a small rental house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind where the fences don't fully block the view, and you can still see a decent stretch of sky if you lean back far enough. It was clear that night, no clouds, not much wind either, just enough to move the tops of the trees now and then. I wasn't doing anything special. No telescope, no beer, no big plan to sit out and stare at the stars. I just ended up there because it was quiet and I didn't feel like going to bed yet. The first thing that caught my attention was one bright star above the tree line behind my neighbor's shed. It wasn't the brightest thing in the sky, but bright enough that it stood out. White, steady, not blinking like a plane. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I noticed it again. Not because it had moved, because it hadn't. I don't know much about astronomy, but I know the sky shifts. Even if it's slow, if you sit there long enough, things change a little. That one didn't seem to. I straightened up in the chair and used the corner of my neighbor's roof as a reference point. The light sat just above it, slightly to the left. I looked away for a while, checked my phone, scrolled through nothing, put it face down on my leg, looked back up. Same spot. I remember telling myself it was probably just too slow to notice. Then I started checking it every few minutes. The rest of the stars were where you'd expect them, but after a while the pattern around it seemed to shift slightly. Not much, just enough that I could tell the sky was doing what the sky normally does. That one point of light wasn't. It stayed pinned above the roofline like it had been painted there. That was the first moment it stopped feeling casual. I stood up and moved a few feet across the yard to see if it was some weird angle thing. The star changed position from where I stood, obviously, but once I stopped walking, it settled into another fixed point relative to the fence post near the back corner. I waited. Still nothing. It didn't drift. It didn't pulse. It just held there. I went back inside and grabbed a hoodie because it had gotten colder without me noticing. When I came back out, I expected it to have shifted at least a little while I was gone. It hadn't. Same place. That's when I checked the time for real. 11:47. I put the phone away and just kept staring at it. There wasn't anything else strange yet. The neighborhood still sounded normal. A car passed somewhere out front. Someone's TV was faint through an open window 2 houses down. A dog barked once, then stopped. Everything felt ordinary except for that one point in the sky. I thought about taking a picture, but I already knew how that would turn out. Just a black screen with maybe one blurry dot if I got lucky. Still, I tried. The photo looked useless. A few faint specks, too much grain. The bright one was barely there, and somehow it didn't look fixed in the image the way it did with my own eyes. I deleted it. Around midnight, I started noticing how often I was checking that one spot. Like I couldn't stop myself. Every time I tried to look at other parts of the sky, my eyes slid back to it. I sat down again and kept comparing it to the roofline. Nothing. No change. That's when another weird thought hit me. It wasn't just holding still. It was holding still in a way that felt deliberate. I know how stupid that sounds, but that's how it felt. Not natural stillness, not distant stillness, more like it was maintaining position. I got up again and walked closer to the back fence. The grass was damp on my shoes. I rested one hand on the top rail and looked up through a gap in the branches, still there. The air felt colder out there by the fence, the kind of cold that settles into your face first. I listened for planes. Nothing. No distant engine noise. No helicopter chop. No sound at all from that direction. I checked my phone again. 12:26. More than half an hour since I first started paying attention. Still in the same place. I remember laughing once, just under my breath, because the whole thing felt ridiculous. I was standing in my own backyard getting unsettled by something that might have been completely normal. So I made myself go inside. I told myself I'd give it 20 minutes, come back out, and if it was still in the exact same place, then I'd let myself admit it was weird. Inside, the house felt too warm. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, stood by the sink looking out the dark window over the backyard, but I couldn't see the sky from there. I checked the stove clock, 12:31. I lasted maybe 6 minutes before going back out. The chair was still where I left it, angled slightly toward the shed. I stepped around it and looked up. The light was still there, exactly there. I stopped dead in the grass, not close, not bigger, not brighter, just fixed. By then, the rest of the sky had changed enough that I could tell for sure I wasn't imagining it. The stars around it had shifted subtly west, the way they should. That one hadn't moved at all. That's when the night started to feel different. Not dangerous, just thinned out somehow. The distant house noise had gone quieter. Even the breeze seemed to have dropped off. I could hear the faint hum of something electrical from inside my own house, maybe the fridge cycling on, and beyond that, almost nothing. I sat back down, but I wasn't relaxed anymore. I kept staring at it, waiting for any sign of motion. Any proof it was just a normal object catching my attention in a weird way. Nothing. Around 1, I started feeling stupid and tired at the same time. I actually considered waking my brother and calling him out to look at it just to confirm I wasn't overthinking it. But he lived across town, and I knew how that would sound. Hey, come look at this star that refuses to move. So I stayed out there alone. At some point, I noticed I hadn't looked at my phone in a while. I checked the time again, 1:18. That bothered me more than I expected. 2 hours almost, and the light had not moved in any way I could detect. I got up and paced the yard a little, mostly to warm up. Every few steps, I looked back up. It was still there every time, as if it had been waiting in the exact place I'd left it. I don't know how long I stayed near the fence the second time, but long enough that my eyes adjusted so completely the whole sky looked deeper than before. That's when I thought maybe the light looked slightly wrong in another way. Not brighter, exactly. Sharper. Most stars seem to twinkle a little when you stare at them long enough, especially that low. This one didn't. It stayed clean and hard-edged, like a pinhole punched through something bright behind the sky. That thought got under my skin immediately. I went back to the chair and sat again because standing there made me feel exposed for some reason. I remember staring at the rooftops, the fence lines, the black outlines of the trees, trying to ground myself in normal things. Then I looked up again. Still there. The world narrowed a little after that. It was just me and that point of light and the growing certainty that I was watching something that didn't belong in the night the way everything else did. I must have dozed off for a few minutes at some point because the next thing I remember clearly was waking with my chin almost on my chest and my neck aching. The backyard looked a shade lighter. Not daylight yet, but getting there. I jerked my head up immediately and found the light. Still there. Same place. I checked the time. 4:41. That made my stomach drop. Because however long I'd half slept, however much the sky had changed, that point still hadn't moved. The trees behind the neighboring houses were clearer now, just dark shapes against a bluish sky. A few of the dimmer stars had already disappeared. That one remained. And now, with dawn starting to come in, it seemed even stranger. It should have either faded with the rest or stood out differently. Instead, it just stayed itself, unchanged, while the sky around it slowly brightened. I stood up one last time and walked closer to the fence. My breath was visible now. Everything was very still. The neighborhood hadn't fully woken up, but somewhere far off I could hear a truck starting, and a bird made one short, uncertain chirp from the trees. The ordinary world was coming back. The light stayed there above the roof. Then, very slowly, it began to fade. Not move, not drift, just lose brightness. At first, I wasn't sure it was happening. I thought it might be the dawn washing it out. But that wasn't it. The stars around it were disappearing in the usual way as the sky lightened, blending into the blue. This one was different. It held its position and then thinned out from the center, like its brightness was being dialed down. I stared so hard my eyes watered. It kept fading. Still no movement. still in the exact same place, just less there, and then it was gone. Not with a jump or a flash, just gone enough that I couldn't tell where it had been anymore. The patch of sky over the roof was empty, completely normal. By then, the dawn was strong enough that only the very brightest stars remained, and even those were on their way out. I stood there for a long time after it disappeared, still looking at the same spot. Nothing came back. The birds got louder. A car door slammed somewhere nearby. One of my neighbor's kitchen lights clicked on. The whole world slid back into morning like nothing had happened. I went inside eventually because I was freezing and my legs felt heavy. Before I shut the back door, I looked up one more time. Empty sky. No sign it had ever been there. I slept maybe an hour after that, then went to work feeling like I had a secret I didn't know how to explain without sounding stupid. That's the part that stayed with me most. Not that I saw a strange light. It's that it stayed fixed while the night moved around it. Hours passed. The sky turned. The world kept going. And that one thing held its place above my neighbor's roof as if time applied to everything except whatever I was looking at. Then, just before the sun came up enough to erase the stars, it faded out quietly and left nothing behind but an ordinary morning and the feeling that something had spent the whole night above my house, perfectly still, waiting for me to notice it. The radio died so suddenly I thought the truck had stalled. 1 second I had some late-night AM station mumbling about crop prices and county politics, and the next it was just gone. Not static, not fading, just silence, so clean it felt like someone had reached in and muted the whole world. I glanced at the dash right away. Headlights still on, engine steady, speed holding around 50. Everything else looked normal. My name's Wade Mercer. I was driving home from my brother-in-law's place out in the country, taking the long 2-lane back road that cuts through fields and patches of woods. It was a route I knew well enough not to need directions, but at night it always felt a little different. Less like a road and more like a line someone drew through darkness. It was sometime after midnight. I don't remember the exact time because I didn't check until later, but it had to be after 1. The road was empty. No oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead, nothing. Just fence posts flashing past in my beams and the black shapes of fields stretching out on both sides. I twisted the radio knob once, then again, nothing. The display was still lit and the station number was still there, but no sound came out. I switched stations, then another, then FM. Same thing. That was strange enough to get my full attention. I turned the volume all the way up. Still nothing. Not even hiss. Just that same blank silence. I rolled my window down halfway, thinking maybe I'd somehow blown a fuse and was overreacting. Cold air came in hard, carrying the smell of wet dirt and cut hay. It had rained earlier that evening and the ground still held it. That's when I noticed the light. It was off to my right, low over a distant field. Bright white. Not huge, but bright enough that it stood out immediately once I saw it. It hung maybe 20 feet above the ground, just over the dark line of some fencing or maybe a drainage ditch. Hard to tell at that distance. At first I thought it might be a farm vehicle parked out there with a work light on, but it wasn't on the ground, and it wasn't moving. I eased off the gas a little without meaning to. The truck dropped to about 45. The engine sounded louder in the silence. I looked back at the radio and tried one more station, hand moving out of pure habit. Nothing. When I looked back up, the light was still there. Same place, same brightness. I remember thinking it was wrong how clean it looked. Even from that far away, it didn't bloom or flare like a floodlight or headlights do at night. It just sat there, steady and contained, like a star had come down and stopped over that field. I drove another quarter mile, maybe more, keeping one eye on the road and one on the light, still there. Then I noticed something else. The field around it wasn't lit up. That sounds small, but it mattered. If you've ever seen a bright light hanging over open land at night, you know how it throws itself around. You see the ground catch it, fence posts, weeds, something. This didn't. The light existed, but the field stayed black. I slowed a little more. The road curved gently left, which should have changed the angle, maybe hidden it behind the rise or shifted it farther off. It didn't. For a second, it looked almost like it had moved with me, keeping the same place in my windshield. That was the first moment I felt actually uneasy. Not scared, just that creeping feeling when something stops behaving the way you expect. I checked the rearview mirror. Empty road. The darkness behind me looked flat and complete, like the highway had been erased the second I passed over it. I looked back at the field. The light was still there. Then it wasn't. No fading, no dropping, no sliding off behind a tree line. 1 second it hung over the field, and the next the whole area was just dark. At the exact same moment, the radio burst back to life so loud it made me jump. And that'll be mostly cloudy through Thursday. I slapped the volume down and nearly swerved. The sound of that man's voice felt wrong for a second, like it had no business being there. I gripped the wheel and brought the truck back straight. The road kept running ahead through the dark, empty as ever. The field where the light had been was completely black now. Nothing in it. No house, no vehicle, no barn light in the distance, just wet ground and darkness. I drove another mile, maybe 2, before I realized my hands were tight on the wheel, hard enough to hurt. I tried to laugh it off. Bad reception, some weird visual trick, maybe a light from a tower beyond the rise that cut out when the road curved. I told myself that a few times. Then the radio cut out again. All at once, same dead silence. I felt my stomach drop before I even looked right. The light was back, not in the same place. Closer, still to my right, but now over a field much nearer to the road. I could make out fence posts in my headlights on that side, and the light was maybe a few hundred yards beyond them. Same white glow, same steady brightness, no ground illumination, no beam, just hanging there. I cursed out loud, mostly to hear something. My own voice sounded small in the cab. I kept driving a little faster now, not flooring it, just not wanting to be beside that field any longer than I had to be. The light stayed where it was. Then the road bent right, closer toward the field, and for a few seconds it looked like I was headed almost straight at it. I remember thinking I should keep my eyes on the road. That's the normal thing. Don't stare at whatever weird thing is in the distance. Just drive. But I kept looking. The light didn't grow larger the way it should have as I approached. It stayed the same size, same brightness, same impossible stillness. Then, right before the road should have lined me up with it, it shifted. Not smoothly, not like it flew or drifted. It was simply farther back in the field than it had been a second before. Like I was seeing separate moments with something missing between them. That made the hair on my arms stand up. I pressed the gas harder. The truck responded, engine rising. The radio stayed silent. I looked up at the sky out of reflex, maybe expecting to see a helicopter or plane responsible for it somehow. Nothing. Clear sky, a few stars, no moon where I could see it. I passed another field entrance, just a break in the fence with a dirt track leading inward. For one stupid second I thought about turning in there, driving out and seeing what it was. That thought passed as soon as it came. No chance. I kept going. The light stayed off to my right, pacing my position across the field somehow, even though it never seemed to move. Every few seconds, it just appeared a little farther over, as if correcting itself. The effect made it hard to look at for long. My eyes wanted motion, and it refused to give me any. Then something hit the roof of the truck. Not hard. Just a dull tap. I flinched and looked up again, expecting a branch or maybe a bird. Nothing above me. Another tap. Toward the back this time. I glanced in the side mirror and saw only darkness and the faint outline of my own truck. No rain, no debris. The tapping stopped, the light remained. I checked the clock on the dash then. It was blinking 12, which made no sense because I knew I hadn't lost power and I hadn't reset it in months. The station display on the radio was gone too now, just a blank, backlit rectangle. I don't know why that bothered me more than the light, but it did. It made the whole thing feel less like something outside, and more like it had reached into the truck with me. I passed a crossroads with a single stop sign and didn't even consider turning. Home was straight ahead. I kept straight. That was when I finally saw another pair of lights, far ahead, coming the other way. Just 2 tiny points on the road. The second I registered them, the radio snapped back on with a burst of static so sharp it made me wince. Then music, some old country song, mid-verse. The dash clock came back too, now showing 1:43. I looked right immediately. The field was black, no light, nothing hanging there, just the wet outline of furrows catching a little of my headlights. The oncoming car passed me a few seconds later. Just a regular sedan. Its headlights washed through my cabin were gone. For a second, I wanted to flash them down, wave them over, ask if they'd seen anything. I didn't. I just kept driving. The rest of the way home, the radio worked normally. Every station came in. The truck ran fine. No more lights, no more silence, no more tapping on the roof. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there with the engine idling and looked at the clock again. 1:43 had become 1:44. 1 minute had passed since the radio came back. But from the point where the first silence hit to the moment I saw those oncoming headlights, it felt much longer than that. Long enough for 2 separate stretches of road, 2 sightings, all of it. I went inside, locked the door, and stood in the kitchen for a while with the house dark around me. A couple days later, I drove that route in daylight. I found both fields where I thought I'd seen the light. There was nothing there. No equipment, no utility poles, no structures set back far enough to explain a hovering light. Just soaked earth, fences, and low ground. I still take that road sometimes, though not if I can help it. And every now and then, when the radio stutters for even a second, I feel that same knot pull tight in my chest, and I find myself looking out over the fields before I mean to. Because what stayed with me wasn't just the light, it was the silence before it appeared. The way every station died at once, like something had cleared out a space for itself. And the way the signal came back the exact moment the light disappeared, like whatever had been out there, low over those fields waiting in the dark, had finished with me and moved on. I woke up because the room looked wrong. Not fully lit, not like someone had turned a lamp on. Just brighter than it should have been at that hour, with that washed out look you get right before a storm, except I knew it hadn't been storming when I went to bed. I lay there for a second trying to figure out what had changed. My room was always dark at night. I kept the blinds shut, no streetlight hit that side of the house, and my phone was face down on the dresser. But the ceiling was visible. So was the closet door, the chair in the corner, the shape of my jacket hanging off it. I checked my phone, 2:34 a.m. That's when I got up and went to the window. My name's Matt Corbin. I lived in a small house outside of town that was mostly farms and a few subdivisions stitched together by long county roads. Nothing remote exactly, but quiet enough that nights stayed dark. I pulled the blind up a few inches and looked out. At first, I couldn't tell what I was seeing. The yard looked normal. The fence, the shed, the back patch of grass I never mowed evenly. Everything was dim and still. Then I looked up. There was a pale glow above the house. Not in the distance, not over the horizon, directly above. It lit a circular patch of low clouds, just big enough to cover the space over my roof and part of the yard. The rest of the sky was darker. You could actually see where the glow stopped. It didn't feather out naturally like moonlight through clouds. It just held in one area. I stood there with one hand on the blind cord, staring up. The clouds themselves weren't moving much. There was no wind that I could hear, and the trees in the backyard were completely still. But the glow didn't seem to come from the clouds. It was lighting them from above or within or something. Hard to tell. It made the bottoms of them look flat, like a ceiling. My first thought was helicopter, but there was no sound. That part bothered me right away. Even if something was high enough that I couldn't see it, I should have heard something. Rotor noise, engine noise, anything. The whole neighborhood was quiet enough at night that if a car door slammed 2 houses down, you heard it. I cracked the window open. Cold air came in, damp and still. No sound at all. Not even insects. No traffic in the distance. No dog barking somewhere. Just nothing. I leaned out a little farther and looked over the roofline, thinking maybe the source was off behind the house and I just couldn't see the angle from inside. Nothing. The glow held exactly where it was, above the center of the house. I checked the time again, then took my phone and opened the camera. The screen showed the clouds, but the glow looked weaker through the phone, smaller somehow. Less unsettling than it looked with my own eyes. I took a picture anyway. It looked like a pale smudge over a dark roof. I took another one, then a short video. Same thing. The camera flattened it. Lost whatever made it feel wrong. I lowered the phone and looked up again. Still there. Same patch of brightness. I went into the hallway and checked the front windows. From the front of the house, I could still see part of it hanging above the roof, but only barely. It looked more concentrated from my bedroom side, like the center of it was right over my room. That thought made me stop for a second. I went back into the bedroom and looked up again through the window. Same place, same size. The room behind me still had that faint gray-white light to it, enough to see everything without turning anything on. I don't know how long I stood there before I decided to go outside. It wasn't a good idea, and I knew that, but standing inside looking at it felt worse somehow, like being under it and not knowing what it was. I threw on my hoodie and went through the back door. The yard was colder than I expected. The grass felt wet through my socks and shoes almost immediately. I stepped out just far enough to clear the overhang and looked straight up. The clouds above me were glowing in a near-perfect oval. Not bright enough to hurt your eyes, but bright enough that it made everything below feel drained of color. The shed roof had a pale edge to it. The top of the fence had a faint line of light on it. But there were no shadows. That's what got me. The whole yard was illuminated just enough to see, but nothing cast a shadow in any clear direction. I turned slowly in place. The glow stayed centered over the house, not over the block, not over the neighborhood, over my house. I looked at the neighboring roofs. Dark. Their yards were darker too. The light really did cut off that sharply. I checked for power lines, transformers, anything that could explain reflected light from somewhere. There was nothing. No utility truck, no security light, no flood lamp from a neighbor. I stood in the middle of the backyard listening. That silence was the worst part. Not because it was complete, but because it felt deliberate. Like sound should have been there and wasn't. Then I felt something I hadn't noticed inside. A faint vibration. Not in the ground, in the air. It was so subtle I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. It felt like when a truck is idling somewhere far away and you can just barely pick it up in your chest, except there was no truck and no engine noise, just a low pressure that seemed to sit in the space around me. I looked back up. The clouds in the center of the glow looked smoother than the rest, almost flattened. Every few seconds I thought I saw a darker shape pass behind them. Not across the sky, but within the bright area itself, like something between layers. Each time I tried to focus on it, it was gone. I took a few more steps into the yard, farther than I needed to. I don't know what I thought I'd see from a different angle. The glow remained directly above. It didn't shift perspective the way it should have if it were coming from a fixed point nearby. It just stayed centered. That's when I started feeling watched. Not in the usual paranoid way, not like someone in the bushes or at the fence. It was more like the attention was coming from above, and I happened to be standing in it. I backed up toward the house. The vibration in the air got a little stronger for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, enough that I felt it in my teeth. Still no sound. Then, the bedroom light inside the house clicked on by itself. I froze. I know how that sounds. Maybe I'd left the switch halfway, maybe there was an electrical issue, whatever. But that room light almost never got used, and I hadn't touched it. I turned and looked through the window. The lamp on my dresser was on, throwing a warm yellow pool against the pale white from above. The mix of those two lights made the room look even stranger, like one part of it belonged to the house and the other didn't. When I looked back up, the glow had narrowed slightly. Same brightness, but the edges had pulled inward. I don't know why that made me panic, but it did. I moved to the back door fast, got it open, and stepped inside. The moment I shut it, the silence eased just a little. I could hear the fridge humming from the kitchen again. I hadn't even realized that sound was gone before. I went straight to my bedroom, turned the lamp off, and stood by the window again. The glow was still there. Smaller now. More concentrated. The bright patch of cloud had tightened from an oval into something closer to a circle, directly over the roof peak. It reminded me of a spotlight trying to focus, except the source still wasn't visible. I checked my phone. 2:48. Only 14 minutes had passed since I woke up. It felt like much longer. Then, very slowly, the glow began to dim, not fade outward. It dimmed inward, like the brightness was being lowered from the center first. The edges stayed visible a second longer, and for a moment the clouds looked hollow, like I was seeing the outline of where the light had been rather than the light itself. And then it was gone. Not abruptly, just fully gone within maybe 5 or 6 seconds. The clouds above the house turned ordinary dark gray. The room went dark again, except for what little pre-dawn night seeped in through the blinds. The vibration disappeared with it, and all at once, the normal sounds came back. A car way off on the county road, a dog barking somewhere, a branch tapping faintly against the fence 2 yards over. Just regular night sounds, like someone had unmuted the world. I stood there staring up for another few minutes, waiting for the glow to return. It didn't. Eventually I checked the photos again. Same useless pale smear. Nothing in the video but my own breathing and a dark patch of sky that got slightly brighter and then darker again. I didn't sleep after that. Around 5:30, when the sun was starting to come up, I went outside to look for something. Anything. Burn marks, footprints, damage to the roof, the yard, whatever. There was nothing. The grass was wet with dew. The air smelled normal. The house looked exactly the same. I even walked out to the street and looked back at the roof from different angles. Nothing. No sign the clouds over my house had been lit up for 15 minutes in the middle of the night by something I couldn't hear or see. The weirdest part didn't hit me until later that morning when I looked at the weather app. It showed cloud cover overnight, but not low clouds. High cloud. Thin cloud. What I'd seen looked low enough to touch. I still don't know what was over the house that night. I don't even know if over is the right word. But every now and then, if I wake up in the middle of the night and the room feels even a little too bright, I sit completely still for a second before I move. And I listen first, because the light was one thing. The silence before it disappeared was worse. I saw it before the sun came up, when the lake was still black and the wind had already started pushing white caps towards shore. My name's Grant Holloway. I'd been shore fishing that lake for years, mostly because it was close enough to hit before work and quiet enough that you could stand out there half asleep and not deal with anybody. That morning, the weather was bad for fishing. Not storming, but close to it. Cold wind coming hard across the water, steady enough that it kept flattening my jacket against my chest. The kind of wind that finds every gap in your clothes and makes your hands ache even before you get them wet. I got there a little after 5. Still dark. No one else at the pull-off, no other headlights, no boats on the water. Just me, a thermos, and too much stubbornness to admit it probably wasn't worth being there. The lake looked rough, even in the dark. You could hear it more than see it at first. Water slapping the rock bank in uneven bursts, reeds rubbing together, the occasional hollow thunk of driftwood hitting somewhere farther down the shoreline. I set up anyway, cast out once, maybe twice, and mostly just stood there with the rod tucked against my hip, staring out over the chop. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a boat light out on the water. It was low and white and bright enough to catch your eye right away. But there were a few things wrong with that immediately. First, it wasn't moving with the waves. Second, it wasn't throwing any kind of beam. And third, it was too still. It was maybe 100 yards out, hovering just above the surface. Hard to judge the exact distance in the dark, but close enough that if it had been attached to anything normal, I should have been able to make out more than just the light itself. I remember narrowing my eyes and taking one step closer to the edge, like that would somehow make it clearer. The wind kept hitting the water hard around it. You could see the surface breaking and tossing everywhere else, but the light just held its position. It didn't bob, didn't sway, didn't drift left or right. It stayed fixed above the lake like it was hanging from something I couldn't see. I stood there for a minute convincing myself it had to be a buoy or marker light. But there aren't any markers on that part of the lake, and even if there were, the water would have moved it. This thing looked like it had no relationship to the lake at all. I checked behind me, half expecting to see another car pulling in or somebody else coming down the bank who might have noticed it too. Nothing. The parking area was empty. The trees behind the shoreline were just dark shapes bending in the wind. I looked back at the water. Still there. Same place. Same brightness. One of the stranger things about it was the color. It was white, but not like a flashlight or a spotlight. It didn't look harsh. It looked clean, almost flat, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't really emitting light so much as just existing as brightness. And even though it was bright enough to stand out against the whole lake, it didn't seem to illuminate the water around it properly. That part bothered me right away. There should have been some kind of spill, some reflection, some visible path across the surface. There was a reflection, but it was wrong. Instead of stretching and breaking with the chop the way reflections usually do, it stayed too tight, too contained, like a pale vertical smear directly beneath it, and nothing more. The waves should have torn it apart. They didn't. I reeled my line in without really thinking about it. My hands were cold and clumsy, and I almost dropped the lure on the rocks. I wasn't interested in fishing anymore. I just wanted both hands free. I stood there with the rod tucked under my arm and watched it. Minutes passed. I know that because I checked my phone once and it was 5:17. The light hadn't moved at all. The wind was still coming hard off the lake, pushing spray close enough that I could feel it on my face every now and then. My eyes kept going from the light to the water around it, trying to catch some clue, anything that would make it make sense. At one point I thought maybe I could hear something from it, some faint hum or vibration, but every time I tried to isolate it all I got was wind and water. Still, something about the whole scene felt muted, like the sounds around that one spot were being flattened, not gone, just dulled. I stepped down off the packed dirt bank and onto the wet rocks near the edge to get a better angle. Probably stupid, considering the conditions. My boots slipped a little and I had to catch myself on one knee. The rocks were slick and freezing. When I looked up again, the light was still exactly where it had been. That's when I started getting that awful, creeping feeling that I was the only thing moving in the whole scene. The lake was moving, the trees were moving. The clouds above were dragging past so fast they barely had shape. But compared to that light, everything else almost felt frantic. The more I stared at it, the more wrong its stillness seemed. I checked the sky above it, thinking maybe there was some chance it was an aircraft lining up perfectly from my angle. But the sky was still dark enough that I could only make out the lower cloud cover moving east. And there was nothing there. No blinking lights, no shape, no sound of engines. I tried filming it with my phone. The screen made it look smaller and more ordinary, just a bright point over dark water. It lost the part that made it feel impossible. I zoomed in, but the image went soft and grainy. The light bloomed out and turned into a useless white blotch. I stopped recording. There was no point. When I lowered the phone again and looked with my own eyes, it seemed sharper than before. More defined, and I noticed something else. It wasn't perfectly round. I don't know how I missed it at first, maybe because of the distance, but it had the slightest vertical stretch to it. Not much, just enough that if you stared long enough, it stopped looking like a point and started looking like an object. Still featureless, still just pale white, but not star-like anymore. It remained there another few minutes. I checked my phone again. 5:24. No sunrise yet, but the sky had started to thin at the horizon. Just enough gray showing behind the black cloud line that the water no longer looked completely bottomless. The wind hadn't eased at all. If anything, it was worse. And that's when the light moved. Not sideways, not up. Down. Slowly. So slowly at first that I thought maybe my eyes were tricking me, but then I fixed on the line where it met its reflection, and it was definitely descending, straight down toward the water. The strangest part was that it didn't change brightness while it moved. It didn't flicker or respond to the spray or the waves. It just lowered itself, steady and controlled, like it was being pulled straight into the lake. I actually took a step backward when I realized what it was doing. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. I expected some kind of impact, a splash, steam, a burst of light, anything. There was nothing. The bottom edge of the glow touched the surface, or seemed to, and then kept going. It passed into the water without disturbing it. No spray, no ripple different from the rest, no sound. The reflection beneath it just shortened and shortened until there was none left, and then the light itself sank below the surface line and disappeared. That was it. The water where it had been looked exactly like the water everywhere else, dark, wind-torn, uneven. If I hadn't been watching that exact spot, I would never have known anything had happened there. I stood frozen for a while after that, still staring at the place where it went under, half expecting it to come back up, half expecting something worse. But nothing did. The lake just kept moving. The wind kept hitting the shoreline, the reeds kept bending and snapping back, and slowly, as the horizon lightened, the whole thing began to look ordinary again. That might have been the most unsettling part. How quickly the lake became just a lake once the light was gone. I stayed another 10 minutes, maybe more, though I never cast again. By then, the eastern sky was turning gray-blue, and the first real outlines of the far shore were coming in. No sign of boats, no sign of buoys, no floating debris, nothing in that area to suggest anything had been there at all. When I finally packed up, my hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. I drove home with the heater blasting and the radio off. I didn't want noise. I didn't want somebody talking at me like the world was still normal. Later that afternoon, after I'd slept a little, I went back through the video on my phone. It showed the light hovering, but the moment it started descending, the autofocus hunted and the image blurred. By the time it reached the water, it was just a smeared white shape against black. Then nothing. Completely useless. I went back to the lake 2 days later in daylight. Same shoreline, same stretch of water, same rocks. Nothing there. No marker, no structure, nothing submerged that I could see from shore. Just cold water and wind and the usual trash caught in the reeds. I still fish there sometimes, but never before sunrise now. And every time the wind gets up and the lake starts chopping like it did that morning, I catch myself looking out toward that same section of open water. Because what sticks with me isn't just that I saw a bright thing over the lake. It's the way it ignored everything the world was doing around it. The wind didn't touch it, the waves didn't touch it, and when it went into the water didn't seem to know it had been there at all. I noticed the silence before I noticed the thing above the ridge. It was early afternoon, and the trail had been noisy in the normal way up until then. Birds in the trees, insects in the brush, the occasional rustle of something small moving through dead leaves, nothing dramatic, just that constant background sound you stop hearing after a while. Then it all cut out, not faded, not quieted down gradually, it just stopped. I was mid-step when it happened, coming around a bend where the trail opened slightly and the ridgeline came into view through the trees. 1 second there were birds somewhere uphill to my left, and the next there was nothing. No chirping, no buzzing, no movement in the branches. I stopped walking without even thinking about it. My name's Nate Holloway. I'd been hiking that trail alone for a few hours, just doing a loop I'd done a couple times before. Nothing remote enough to be dangerous if something went wrong, but quiet enough that once you got far enough in, you stopped hearing roads or people. The weather had been good. Cool, dry, bright enough that the patches of sunlight through the trees looked sharp on the ground. No wind to speak of. That silence hit hard because it felt unnatural right away. I stood there listening, waiting for the sound to come back. It didn't. The trail ahead climbed gently toward a rocky rise where the trees thinned out near the top. Through the gap, I could see part of the ridge beyond it. That's when I saw the object. At first, I thought it was a reflection or some weird angle of sunlight off rock. It was up above the ridge line, maybe 50 or 60 feet over it. Hard to tell distance in the mountains, but it was clearly separated from the ground. It wasn't bright. That's the first thing I always end up saying when I think back on it. It wasn't glowing or flashing. It just caught the light in a way that made it stand out. Metallic looking was the closest thing I ever came up with. Not shiny like chrome, more like dull aluminum, maybe, or brushed steel. It looked smooth. The shape was hard to pin down because it wasn't there long, but it seemed oval from where I stood. Not perfectly round and not long enough to be a plane shape, just something solid looking, suspended over the ridge with no visible movement. I remember narrowing my eyes and taking one slow step off the trail to get a clearer view through the trees. It stayed exactly where it was. No wobble, no drift, no sound. That last part to me fast. Even if it had been a drone, which was my first real attempt at a normal explanation, there should have been some sound. Out there in that kind of silence, even something small would carry, but there was absolutely nothing. The air felt still too. Not dead, exactly, but held, like the whole place had paused. I set my backpack down quietly, which sounds ridiculous because there was no one to be quiet for, but everything felt sharper in that silence. Even the buckle brushing a rock sounded too loud. I straightened up and looked again. The object was still there. The sunlight caught one side of it for a second and gave me a better sense of its edge. It didn't have visible wings, rotors, or anything sticking off it, just a clean shape, slightly darker on the underside, like the light was sliding across a curved surface. I took another step, this time off the trail and onto a patch of dirt between two low pines. That was when I got the strangest feeling of the whole thing. It wasn't fear at first, it was the sense that I was not supposed to be seeing it. That's the best way I can put it. Not like I discovered something hidden, exactly. More like I had moved into the one place where the angle lined up and revealed it. I stood very still after that. The object remained fixed for what was probably only a few seconds, but it felt longer because I was trying to absorb every detail at once. The silence, the shape, the fact that it wasn't moving in any way I could track. Then it shifted, not moved, shifted. That's important, shifts, because I didn't see it travel from one position to another. One instant it was there above the ridge, and then it seemed slightly farther left. Same height, same angle, same stillness. Like I had missed a piece of time between frames. I blinked hard and stared at it. No motion followed. It was just in the new place now. That's when the fear started to creep in. My first thought was that something was wrong with my vision. I rubbed one eye with the heel of my hand, looked again. Still there, still silent, still fixed in place. My second thought was to grab my phone. I had it in a side pocket, and for a second, I actually started reaching for it. Then the silence deepened somehow. I know that doesn't make sense. Silence is silence. But that's how it felt. As if the air around me was being pressed flat. I stopped reaching. I don't know why. I just didn't want to look away from it long enough to lose track. The object seemed to dull slightly, not from fading, but like the angle of light changed. It became harder to see against the bright sky over the ridge. I shifted my stance, trying to line it up between branches, and then it was gone. Not fast, not with a streak or drop or rise. Just gone. The space above the ridge was empty. I stood there waiting for it to reappear somewhere nearby, maybe farther up, maybe moving behind a cloud or tree line. There were no clouds. Nothing moved. The silence held for another second, maybe two. Then the birds came back. All at once. Not even the same birds, I don't think. Just a burst of sound from multiple directions that made me flinch harder than the object had. A few insects started up again almost immediately too. The whole forest filled back in like somebody had unmuted it. I stayed where I was for a while, staring at the ridge. Nothing returned. Eventually, I picked up my backpack and kept walking, mostly because standing still felt worse. I told myself over and over that it had to be something explainable, some kind of aircraft seen from a strange angle, maybe a trick of light off a weather balloon or survey equipment. But none of those explanations lasted very long. When I reached the clearing near the top of that section, I stopped again and looked over the same ridge from a better angle. Nothing. No tower. No equipment. No metal structure on the rocks. Just trees and the pale slope beyond. I finished the hike, but I was distracted the rest of the way. Every time the birds went quiet, even for a second, I stopped and looked up. By the time I got back to the parking area, things felt normal again. Too normal, almost. A couple of other cars were there. Someone's dog barked from farther down the lot. A guy in a red jacket was tightening his boots near his tailgate. Ordinary stuff. I almost said something to him. Just something casual like, "Hey, did you notice anything strange up on the ridge today?" I didn't. I knew how it would sound the moment it left my mouth. A few days later, I went back, mostly because I didn't like the idea of letting the trail itself become part of the memory. I took the same loop around the same time of day. Everything was normal. Birds the whole way up, wind in the branches, nothing above the ridge but open sky. I stood in the same place where I'd first seen it and tried to line up the angle through the trees. There was no sign of anything. No hidden structure, no service road, no reflective surface that might have caught the sun like that. Just the ridge. I still hike out there sometimes, but I notice the birds more now. When they stop, even briefly, I stop too. And every time I come around that bend and see the ridge through the trees, I look at the air above it before I look anywhere else. Because what unsettled me most wasn't just that I saw something hovering there. It was the way the forest seemed to know before I did. The reroute happened so casually, I almost followed it without thinking. I was about 15 minutes from home, driving the same route I'd driven hundreds of times, when the voice on my GPS said, "Turn right in 300 feet." I remember actually saying, "What?" out loud. My name's Owen Mercer. I worked late shifts at a machine shop outside town, and the drive home was muscle memory by that point. 2 county roads, 1 short highway stretch, then a left at the old church, and straight on until my neighborhood. There was no reason to turn right there. Nothing was to the right except a narrow black stretch I'd either never noticed before or never paid attention to. I glanced at the screen. The route line had changed. Not a little. Completely. Now it showed me turning off the main road, following this thin side road for what looked like maybe a mile, then reconnecting farther up. No construction notice. No accident alert. No traffic. Just a clean blue line like it had always meant to send me that way. I checked the road ahead, empty. Checked the rear view, also empty. No one behind me. No headlights coming the other way. It was one of those dead quiet rural nights where the dark between things feels solid. The turn came up fast, just a small break in the roadside grass and a narrow strip of asphalt branching off into trees. My first instinct was to ignore it. I should have, but I was tired, and there was that stupid part of me that thought maybe there was road work farther ahead that hadn't been marked. Or maybe the app had some update I didn't know about. So I turned. The moment I did, the road changed under the tires. Not dirt. Paved. But older, rougher. No center line, no reflectors, just a dark ribbon cutting through open land and low trees. My headlights filled it, and nothing beyond. I looked at the GPS again. The route remained steady, still showed me continuing straight. I remember checking the map name, expecting some road label I didn't know. There wasn't one, just the road, no name attached. That bothered me more than it should have. I kept going. The trees on either side thinned out after maybe 30 seconds, opening into fields. The road ran dead straight through them, narrow and oddly level, like something private rather than public. No mailboxes, no driveways, no signs. I had this weird feeling then that I hadn't just taken a side road, I'd slipped off the map somehow. The GPS voice stayed quiet for a while. Then it said, "Continue for 1 mile." The distance didn't change for longer than it should have. I looked at the screen again, still 1 mile. I checked the odometer out of habit, then the road. The fields on both sides looked identical. Flat, low, dark. No farmhouses, no equipment, no barn lights. Just the occasional fence line catching the edge of my beams and vanishing again. The radio had been on low in the background, some late-night station fading in and out depending on the stretch of road. I reached over to turn it down because something about the noise suddenly annoyed me. Before I touched it, it cut out. No static first, just silence. I glanced at the display. The station was still there, still lit, but no sound. I hit the volume knob. Nothing. I switched stations. Nothing. That's when I started to get that creeping feeling in the back of my neck. Not panic, just a sense that normal things were stopping one at a time. The GPS still showed the route, still 1 mile. And then, out ahead, I saw the light. At first it looked like a house light or maybe a tractor parked in the field. Just a pale white point low over the dark horizon. Then I realized it was above the ground, not high. Maybe 15 or 20 feet up, hard to tell, and perfectly still. The road kept leading straight toward it. I slowed down without meaning to. The radio stayed dead silent. The GPS voice didn't say anything else. The light ahead remained fixed, centered slightly off the road, hanging over the field to my left. As I got closer, I kept expecting it to get bigger or change angle or reveal what it actually was. It didn't. That was what made it feel wrong. It stayed the same size for far too long. Like the distance between us wasn't behaving properly. I checked the map again, still 1 mile. I remember actually feeling cold then, even though the heat was still on low. I rolled my shoulders once, trying to shake it off and look back at the road ahead. The light had shifted somehow, not smoothly. I don't mean it drifted. I mean 1 second it was farther left in the field, and the next it was closer to the road. No visible motion between. Just different. That's when I stopped pretending it was normal. I slowed to almost a crawl. The road ahead now looked like it simply ended, not in a barricade or gate. It just ran out into a patch of rough grass and open field. My headlights reached the end of the pavement and then spilled out over weeds and dirt. The light hung there beyond it, silent, white, still. And something about the way it was positioned made me think the road had been leading exactly to that point the whole time. I stopped the car. The engine idled. For a second, that was the only sound. Then even that felt muffled, like the cabin had gotten slightly pressurized. I looked around the interior. Everything seemed normal. Dash lights on, GPS screen glowing, radio lit but silent. I looked back up. The light was still there, maybe 60 or 70 yards away over the field. No beam, no reflection. It didn't seem to illuminate the grass under it at all. It just existed as brightness against the dark. I don't know how long I sat there before I realized the GPS had changed. The blue route line was gone. The whole map had zoomed out by itself. Now I could see the main road again, and according to the screen, I wasn't even on a road anymore. My location marker sat in the middle of a blank patch with no visible route attached to it. I stared at it, then looked up again. The light had not moved. I cracked the driver's window. Cold air came in, but no sound with it. No wind in the grass, no insects, nothing. Just that same dead stillness. I thought about backing up right then, just putting it in reverse and getting out. Instead, I sat there and kept watching the light. It didn't flicker, didn't sway, didn't react. But after a while, I noticed something worse. Every time I looked down at the GPS and then back up, it seemed to be in a slightly different position. Not moving. Just reset. A little higher, a little farther right, then back where it had been. Like I wasn't watching motion at all. Just separate placements of the same thing. That made my mouth go dry immediately. I put the car in reverse. The backup camera came on, and for half a second the screen fuzzed with gray static before clearing. The driveway-sized stretch of road behind me looked too narrow, darker than it should have. I started easing back. The light stayed where it was, or seemed to. Then the GPS voice returned out of nowhere and said, calm as ever, proceed to the highlighted route. At the same moment, the map snapped back to normal. My blue line returned. The road beneath my position marker had a name now. County Route 11, the road I should have been on the entire time. I looked out through the windshield. The field ahead was empty, completely dark. No light, no hovering glow. Nothing but my headlights washing over grass and a sagging fence line farther out. The road now clearly curved right and continued on, reconnecting with the main route just as if it had always been there. The radio came back with a burst of static and then music. I stopped reversing and just sat there, hand locked on the shifter. My heart was pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I looked left across the field. Nothing. Looked right. Same. The muffled feeling inside the car eased almost immediately. I could hear the engine properly again, tires on gravel somewhere outside, the ordinary small sounds of being in a car at night. I checked the GPS screen again. Totally normal. Estimated arrival back. Street names, distance to home. I followed the route the rest of the way without another issue. And here's the part I still can't explain. The next day, in daylight, I went back to find that turnoff. I drove the same stretch twice. There was no side road there. Not a hidden one, not an overgrown one, not even the start of one, just ditch, fence, and field. I stopped and got out to be sure. Nothing. No road, no break in the grass, no old pavement buried under weeds, just roadside dirt and a barbed wire fence running straight through where I knew I'd turned. The GPS history on my phone showed the drive home as normal too. No detour, no unexplained stop. Just a clean route along the main road the entire way. I still use that app. I still drive that road sometimes. But every time I pass that stretch now, I keep my eyes on the shoulder just a little too long, waiting to see if the turnoff appears again. And sometimes when the screen recalculates for no reason or the route line flickers, I feel that same cold pull in my stomach. Because what bothered me most wasn't just the light, it was how easily I followed it. Like whatever was waiting at the end of that road didn't need to force me there. It just needed to make the familiar look wrong long enough for me to turn. I first noticed it because it was always there at the same time. My name's Damon Price. I worked nights as a security guard at a 4-story office building in a business park outside the city. It wasn't a glamorous job. Mostly I did rounds, checked doors, watched cameras, and made sure nobody was sleeping in the stairwells or messing with the loading dock. The place was dead after about 7 in the evening. By midnight, it felt like the whole building had stopped existing. Just me, the hum of the vending machines, and the motion lights out in the parking lot switching on if a cat or a gust of wind set them off. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first time I saw the light, I didn't think much of it. It was around 3:03 in the morning. I remember because I had just glanced at the clock on the monitor before standing up to do my outside walk. I stepped through the side exit near the loading area, zipped my jacket up, and looked out across the back lot. That's when I saw it. A white glow hanging above the far end of the lot, past the fence over the empty stretch of scrub and drainage ditch behind the building. It wasn't huge. From that distance, it looked maybe the size of a porch light seen from across a yard. But it was too high to be attached to anything, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the ground. It didn't blink. It didn't move. It just sat there. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then shrugged it off. I figured it had to be some light from a tower or construction equipment farther out than I realized. Depth gets weird at night, especially in empty places. I did my round, checked the dumpsters, rattled the back gate, came back in. The next night, I saw it again. Same time, give or take a minute, same place, same height. That got my attention a little more. I actually stood there longer that night, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. The business park backed up to a patch of undeveloped land, and beyond that there was a service road and some warehouses farther out. I thought maybe it was one of their yard lights lining up weird from my angle, but the light didn't behave like a normal yard light. For one thing, it didn't throw light onto anything around it. The ground beneath it stayed dark. The weeds, the fence line, the ditch, nothing looked lit up. The light was just there, and it was too clean. No halo. No flicker, no color shift, just a steady white point hanging in the dark. By the 4th night, I started expecting it. I'd check the clock around 2:58, then make up some excuse to be near the back exit by 3. Sure enough, there it was. Same place. Every time. At first, I considered telling somebody, but that's the kind of thing that sounds stupid when you say it out loud. Hey, there's a weird light behind the building every night. Best case, they laugh. Worst case, they start wondering if you're sleeping on shift or losing it, so I kept it to myself. After about a week, it became part of the routine. Watch cameras, do a round, step outside at 3 a.m., see the light, stand there a minute, go back in. But the more I watched it, the more details started bothering me. The lot lights around the building were on motion sensors after midnight, and even from the back door, I could tell when they dim or click brighter. The glow out beyond the fence never changed with them. It didn't seem affected by anything. I tried watching it through the security cameras, but it barely showed up. On the live feed, you could see a faint white smear if you knew where to look, but nothing like what it looked like with my own eyes. I tried taking pictures with my phone. Same problem. It either vanished into blackness or turned into a blown-out dot with no depth at all. One night I brought a pair of old binoculars I kept in my car, thinking maybe that would help. It didn't. Through the binoculars, the light got bigger, but not clearer. It stayed strangely featureless. Just a pale, steady shape. Almost circular, but not perfectly. Its edges looked soft one second and sharp the next, depending on how long I stared, and it still never moved. That was what really got under my skin. I'm not talking about it hovered. It stayed in the exact same spot every night, like it was pinned there. Wind didn't affect it, rain didn't affect it. One night we had strong gusts blowing wrappers and leaves all across the lot, and that thing just sat there as if the air around it wasn't connected to the rest of the world. Then one night around the 3rd week, the cameras in the back hallway cut out for maybe 2 seconds, just enough to flicker black and come back. That had happened before, so I didn't think much of it until I checked the timestamp and saw it was 3:01. I went outside almost immediately. The light was there, same as always. But that night, something felt different. The whole area behind the building seemed quieter than usual. No highway noise in the distance, no wind in the weeds. Even the building's HVAC units sounded duller, like I was hearing them through a wall. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the light until my eyes watered. And for the first time, I thought maybe it wasn't as far away as I'd been telling myself. That feeling stuck with me. Distance got weird with it. Some nights it looked farther out over the scrub. Other nights it felt closer, like it was just beyond the fence line. But if you used landmarks, the leaning utility pole, the drainage ditch, the broken section of chain link, it always lined up in roughly the same place. Roughly. That word started to matter. Because once I began paying real attention, I realized it wasn't exactly the same place every night. It was close. So close you'd miss it unless you were looking for it. But not exact. A little to the left one night, a little higher another. Not drift. Not motion. More like it had been set down in slightly different coordinates. That's the best way I can explain it. It wasn't moving to a new position. It just was in a new position. Like I was looking at separate snapshots, not one continuous thing. That was when I started dreading 3 a.m. Not in a dramatic way. I still came to work, still did my rounds, still joked with the cleaning crew when they were there early. But once the building emptied out and the clock got close, I'd start checking it too often. 2:47. Every little sound in the hallway would make me look up. Every time the monitors flickered or the building settled and popped, I'd feel that small pull of adrenaline. And still, every night I went out there and looked. I don't know what I thought would happen. Maybe I believed that if I kept watching long enough, it would finally do something normal and I could stop thinking about it. Instead, it got worse. The night it changed, I was already tense before I even opened the door. There'd been a storm earlier, but by midnight it had blown through, leaving everything wet and cold. The asphalt in the parking lot still had that dark shine to it, and the air smelled like rain on concrete and dirt. At 2:59, one of the lobby lights flickered once. Just once. I remember because I looked up from the front desk and felt my stomach drop before I even knew why. At 3:02, I stepped into the back hall. At 3:03, I opened the side door, and the light was lower, not by a little, much lower. Instead of hanging out over the scrub past the fence, it was now just beyond the lot, still on the other side of the chain link, but not far, maybe 30 yards out. Close enough that I could tell it wasn't a distant point anymore. It was an object. White, featureless, softly luminous, about the size of a beach ball, maybe a little bigger, and it was hanging only 10 or 12 feet off the ground. I froze with one hand still on the door handle. Everything in me went cold at once. There was no mistaking the distance this time. The fence was visible in front of it. The weeds beneath it were visible too. The light still didn't touch them. They stayed dark, slick from the rain, bending in the windless night. But the object itself was right there, still silent, still perfectly still. I don't know how long I stood in the doorway before I even remembered to breathe. The first thing I noticed, after the shock of seeing it that close, was that it still didn't really illuminate its surroundings. You'd think something that bright, hovering that close, would throw light everywhere. On the fence, on the wet ground, on the side of the building. It didn't. There was a faint wash around it, enough to separate it from the background, but the darkness all around remained mostly intact. It was like the glow belonged only to the thing itself. The second thing I noticed was the silence. Not quiet. Silence. The building behind me had gone dead. No hum from the vents, no buzz from the fluorescents in the hallway, no far-off road noise. Nothing. I could hear my own jacket sleeve sliding against the doorframe when I tightened my grip. I took one step back inside. The object didn't move. I took another step forward again, almost involuntarily, like I had to prove it was still there. It was. At that distance, I could tell it wasn't perfectly round. Not exactly. It looked round in the way a smooth stone does, mostly circular, but with some subtle asymmetry you only notice when you stare too long. The surface didn't shine so much as hold light. There was no glare, no visible source, just a dull, white presence suspended in the air. I thought about going back inside and locking the door. Instead, I stood there like an idiot, staring at it. Then something changed. Not the object, the air. The pressure shifted, just slightly, like riding an elevator or going over a hill too fast. My ears felt full for a second, and that same second my radio, clipped to my belt, gave a soft burst of static. I jumped so hard the radio nearly came loose. The sound lasted maybe half a second. The object didn't react. But after the static, I noticed something else. The side door window, the metal frame, even the wet pavement near my feet all had the faintest wrong-looking shadows, as if the light source didn't line up with where the object actually was. That made me take one full step back into the building. The moment I did, the object was gone, not faded, not risen, not darted away, gone. The space beyond the fence was just dark, empty, wet ground. And at the exact same moment, the building noise came back. Vent hum, electric buzz, a truck somewhere on the main road. Everything snapped back in so abruptly it made me dizzy. I rushed outside onto the wet concrete, scanning left and right, then up. Nothing. The lot lights reflected off puddles. The fence glistened. The weeds bent slightly where water weighed them down. No light, no object, no trace. I stayed out there another 5 minutes, long enough to get soaked through the knees from kneeling by the fence to look for tracks or scorch marks or anything. There was nothing, no flattened grass beneath where it had been. No heat, no smell, nothing. When I went back to the security room and pulled up the camera feed from the back lot, there was a gap, not long. Maybe 20 seconds. The screen froze at 3:11 and resumed at 3:31. No error message, no reboot, just a clean gap. I stared at that timestamp for a long time. I never saw the light again after that. I kept checking for weeks. Still made excuses to be near the back door around 3 a.m. Still glanced across the monitors just before the hour changed. Nothing. No glow, no flicker, no static. Just the ordinary empty lot, the fence, and the scrubland behind it. That somehow made it worse. If it had kept showing up, maybe I could have convinced myself it was a pattern, some strange but fixed thing I just didn't understand. But after that one night, it stopped entirely, like it had been moving closer in increments, night after night, until it reached the building. And once it did, there was no reason to return. I still work nights, just not there. Different site now, different building. Same hours. Around 3 a.m., I still find myself checking the windows without meaning to. And every now and then, when the HVAC hum dies for half a second, or a hallway light flickers once for no reason, I feel that same cold, steady drop in my stomach. Because the part I can't shake isn't that I saw something strange. It's that I'm almost certain it had been coming closer the whole time. I was halfway down the block when every porch light flickered. Not one or two. All of them. Mine behind me, the yellow one on the Ramirez place, the motion light over the Bennett's garage, even the blue-white LED strip somebody 3 houses down kept around their front steps all year. They all dipped at the exact same time, just for a second, then came back. My dog stopped walking before I did. His name was Archer. He was a shepherd mix, about 70 pounds, usually calm at night unless another dog barked first. He'd been pulling ahead the whole walk, nose down, weaving toward every patch of grass like he had to inspect the whole neighborhood before bed. The second the lights dimmed, he froze. Not startled, just stopped. His ears went up. His body went rigid. He was looking over the roofs across the street. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't see anything. It was one of those still, dry nights where sound carries farther than it should. No wind, no cars moving, no voices. The sky was mostly clear, with just a few thin clouds low on the horizon and stars visible over the houses. Pretty normal for late fall where I lived. Then I caught it. A dim orb over the houses to the east. Not bright like a spotlight or a helicopter searchlight. More like a pale, contained glow. It was low enough that it felt wrong immediately, half like it had no business being over a residential street. Maybe a little higher than the power lines, but not by much. Hard to judge exactly with rooftops in the way. It wasn't blinking, it wasn't casting a beam, and it was moving, slowly, silently, drifting across the tops of the houses. I just stood there in the middle of the sidewalk with Archer's leash wrapped once around my hand, watching it move over the block like it had all the time in the world. My name's Ryan Holloway. I'd lived in that neighborhood for 4 years by then. Small houses, short driveways, too many porches with flags and seasonal decorations. Quiet after 10. Boring in a way I liked. Nothing ever happened there. That's part of why it felt so wrong. If I'd seen something like that out on a country road or over a lake or in some empty place, maybe I could have convinced myself it was a drone or a distant aircraft lining up strangely. But over those houses, over mailboxes and parked SUVs and trimmed hedges, it felt out of place in a way I can't describe properly. The orb moved left to right, or maybe more like east to west, keeping the same low height. It didn't wobble, didn't speed up or slow down, just a smooth drift. Archer made a low sound in his throat, not a bark, more like the beginning of one, cut off before it happened. I looked around automatically, expecting somebody else to be outside seeing it too. Nothing. Windows were lit, TVs were on behind curtains. I could hear the faint bass of something from one house farther down, but no doors opened. Nobody stepped out, nobody looked up. That got to me almost as much as the thing itself. The neighborhood looked normal. The orb didn't belong in normal. I took my phone out and opened the camera. On the screen it looked worse, smaller, less defined, just a pale spot over dark roof lines, easy to dismiss if you hadn't been standing there. I tried zooming in, but the image turned soft and grainy. Still, I hit record. Archer shifted beside me, not pulling away, just leaning slightly against my leg like he wanted to stay close. He never did that. Usually he tugged like he was the one taking me for a walk. The orb crossed above the Henderson's place, then over the little stretch where the houses dipped and you could see farther down the street. For a second it seemed clearer there. The glow was smooth, not harsh, like frosted glass lit from within. No edges I could make out, just a round, dim thing moving through the sky without interacting with anything around it. That was another part that felt wrong. It should have been lighting things up more. It was low enough that rooftops should have caught it. Trees should have reflected something. I should have seen shadows shift on the street or on the parked cars. But the block stayed mostly the same. The only obvious change had been that single flicker at the start. And after that, the porch lights just held steady like nothing was happening. I lowered the phone and looked with my own eyes again. The orb was still moving, now over the cul-de-sac entrance at the end of the street. Then every porch light flickered again. Same exact thing. All at once. A quick dip like the whole street had blinked. This time, the orb didn't stop or react. It just kept drifting. I checked my phone screen and saw the recording had frozen for a second. The timer skipped. I stopped recording and started another one, but my hands felt clumsy all of a sudden. Archer still hadn't taken his eyes off the thing. I looked down at him and saw the fur along the back of his neck was slightly raised. That made something cold move through me. I don't know why. It wasn't like he was losing his mind or trying to run. But Archer was not a nervous dog. Seeing him, that focused, that tense, made the whole thing feel heavier. The orb reached the far side of the block and continued, passing above the line of trees behind the last houses. It looked like it should have been farther away at that point, but it didn't get noticeably smaller. Just dimmer, maybe, or harder to separate from the sky. I took a few steps forward without meaning to, pulling Archer with me. The silence stood out then. Not total silence, but enough of a drop that I noticed it. The usual little neighborhood noises had thinned out. No TV bass, no distant traffic, even the light hum from the power lines near the corner seemed gone. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it unsettling. If everything had cut out completely, I probably would have panicked, but instead, it felt like the world had just narrowed. The orb kept going, then it stopped. Not abruptly, not like it hit a wall. It just drifted to a halt above the dark line of trees beyond the block and held there. That was the moment I felt genuine fear. Not because it was doing anything aggressive, just because, until then, it had behaved enough like a thing moving across the sky that my brain could keep offering explanations. Once it stopped over the trees and stayed there, all those explanations fell apart at once. Archer took one step backward, just one. He didn't whine, didn't bark. He just shifted his weight away from it. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out slowly. I remember thinking I should go back inside, that I had no reason to keep standing there watching whatever this was. But I didn't move. The orb stayed fixed over the trees for maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. Long enough that it felt like it was aware of being watched. I hated that thought as soon as it came into my head, but I couldn't shake it. I raised my phone again and zoomed in, trying to get a better shot while it was still. The image shook slightly because my hand was shaking. On the screen, the orb looked less like a sphere and more like a patch of white without detail. Behind it, the stars were washed out. Then the screen went black for about a second. Not my phone shutting off. Just the camera display, like it lost signal or focus completely. When it came back, the orb was still there, same place, same size. I looked up from the screen again, and that was when I noticed something else. The stars around it weren't right. Not blocked exactly, but faded in a circle wider than the light itself, like the sky behind it had been smudged. I don't know if that had been true the whole time, or if I only saw it once the thing stopped. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. That pale, wrong patch around the orb where the sky didn't look normal. Archer suddenly pulled hard toward home. So hard the leash snapped tight and burned across my hand. I almost lost my grip. He wasn't panicking. He just wanted to leave. The strongest, clearest signal I'd ever gotten from him that he wanted absolutely nothing to do with wherever we were standing. I took 2 quick steps back toward my house. The moment I moved, the orb started drifting again. Same smooth pace as before. Not toward me, not away from me exactly, just continuing west above the tree line beyond the houses. And then, after maybe another 5 seconds, it dimmed. Not like it turned off, more like somebody lowering a light behind frosted glass. Steady, even, quiet, until it wasn't there anymore. No sudden burst, no upward movement, no streak across the sky, just a gradual thinning until the sky was empty where it had been. At the exact moment it fully disappeared, every porch light on the block flickered a 3rd time. And just like that, the neighborhood sounds came back. A car somewhere farther off, the hum from the power lines, a TV laugh track from somebody's open upstairs window. Archer turned and walked home fast enough that I had to keep up with him. I didn't argue. By the time I got to my front steps, my hands were shaking hard enough to make the keys rattle. I got inside, locked the door, and went straight to the living room window. I pulled the blind aside just enough to see down the block. Nothing. The street looked normal, lights steady, empty sidewalk, still night. Archer stood beside me for a second, then went straight to his bed and lay down without doing his usual circling first. He kept his head up, though, eyes on the darkened room like he was listening for something. I checked the videos I'd taken. The first one showed the flicker, but barely. You could tell the street dimmed for a split second. The orb was there too, but smaller and duller than it looked in real life. The second video was worse. There was a 1-second black gap where the camera feed dropped, and after that, the orb looked like it was in a slightly different position than it should have been. Not enough to prove anything. Just enough that I knew it didn't match what I remembered watching. I replayed them both maybe 10 times. Nothing about them captured how wrong it felt standing there. The next day, I asked my next-door neighbor if she'd noticed the lights flicker around midnight. She said no, but she'd been awake, just reading in bed. No outage, no issue, nothing unusual. I almost asked if she'd seen anything in the sky. I didn't. That's the worst part about things like this, I guess. The second you say them out loud, they get smaller and dumber, like you're helping turn them into a story instead of a thing that actually happened. But it did happen. I still walk Archer at night, though not as late as I used to. And every so often, when I'm halfway down the block and one of the porch lights buzzes or dims for a second because of some normal electrical hiccup, I feel that same cold little drop in my stomach and look up before I can stop myself. I've never seen the orb again. But sometimes the block feels too quiet for a second, and Archer slows down, and I remember exactly how it moved over those houses. Slow, low, silent, and how nobody else seemed to notice a thing. The power went out so hard, the whole house seemed to flinch. 1 second, I had the TV on in the living room and the dishwasher humming in the kitchen, and the next, there was just this dead blank silence. Not the kind where appliances slowly power down. Everything stopped at once. The lamp beside the couch went black, the TV snapped off mid-sentence, and the house felt bigger immediately. I sat there for a second waiting for it to come back. It didn't. My name's Garrett Voss. I live in a small house at the edge of a wooded area outside town. Not remote, but close enough to tree line that when it gets dark, it gets properly dark. The kind of place where you notice right away when the power's gone because there isn't much other light around to soften it. I checked my phone first. No service bars, which wasn't normal. Not great service out there, but usually enough for a text. I used the screen light to get to the kitchen drawer where I kept a flashlight. When I opened the back door to look outside, the air was colder than I expected. There'd been rain earlier that evening, and the whole yard smelled wet. The grass, the wood fence, the trees beyond the yard, it all had that dark, soaked look. No street lights, no porch lights from the neighbors, just the sky, dim and clouded over enough that it held a little gray. At first I figured the whole neighborhood was out. Then I looked past the fence. There's a stretch of open ground behind my house before the woods start. Maybe 50 yards of uneven grass, then a low tree line, mostly pine and oak. Beyond that, more woods, then a narrow road I almost never used. And there, just above the trees, was the object. I didn't think object right away. I thought light, just a bright white light hanging over the trees. But the more I looked at it, the less it behaved like a light. It was bright, definitely. Bright enough that it should have been throwing light all over the tops of the trees and the wet grass below, but it wasn't. That's what caught me first. The thing itself looked intense, almost clean in a way, but the ground beneath it stayed dark. No beam, no glow spilling downward, no shadows stretching toward me. It just hung there, bright against the dark, doing nothing to the world around it. I stepped down onto the porch, holding the flashlight but not turning it on. The object was maybe 20 or 30 feet above the highest branches. Hard to judge distance in the dark, but low enough that it felt wrong immediately. If something that bright was that close, the whole yard should have been washed out. Instead, the fence was still just a black shape, the tree trunks still hidden, the grass still dark and wet. I remember standing very still and waiting for it to move. It didn't. It didn't drift, didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It was just there. I looked left and right, trying to see if any neighbors were outside. Nothing. No flashlights, no doors opening, no voices. Just that weird, heavy quiet you get after power cuts, when everyone's inside waiting to see if it's temporary. I went back in, grabbed my jacket, and came back out. The object was still there. Same height, same brightness, same total lack of effect on the ground beneath it. That was when I started trying to explain it away. Maybe it was farther than I thought. Maybe it was on some tower past the trees, and I just couldn't judge the distance in the dark. But there are no towers back there. No cell mast, no radio structure, nothing. I knew that because I'd lived there 3 years and looked at those trees every morning while making coffee. I took a few steps off the porch and into the yard. My shoes soaked through almost immediately because I hadn't bothered changing out of the ones I wore at work. The grass was slick and the cold from it came right up through the soles. The object still didn't move. It looked slightly oval from that angle, not perfectly round. But I couldn't be sure. The edges weren't sharp, more like a solid, pale center with a softer outline around it. Not misty exactly, just hard to focus on. I raised my phone and took a picture. On the screen it looked wrong in a completely different way. Smaller, less bright. Like the camera flattened it into a useless white dot over black trees. I took another one, then a short video. Same problem. You could tell something was there, but none of what made it feel strange came through. I lowered the phone and looked at it directly again. Still there. Still fixed. Still not lighting anything up. I must have stood there for 5 full minutes before I noticed the silence had gotten worse. At first, the outage silence felt normal. No appliances, no TVs, no traffic hum in the distance. But this was different. There should still have been other sounds. Frogs, insects, water dripping from leaves, something shifting in the woods. Instead, there was almost nothing. I could hear my own jacket sleeve when I moved my arm. I could hear my breathing. But the yard itself felt muted, as if the whole space between me and the trees had been padded. That got under my skin fast. I turned around and looked back at the house. Completely dark except for the faint phone light in my hand reflecting off the window glass. It looked unfamiliar without the usual porch light and kitchen glow. Then I heard something. Not from the trees, not from the sky, from inside the house. A single click, like a switch being lightly touched. I spun around so fast I almost slipped, Every window stayed dark. No lights came on. I stood there listening, my heart going harder now, trying to hear if it happened again. Nothing. When I turned back toward the tree line, the object was lower, not moving downward, just lower than it had been before, as if I'd looked away and it had changed position while I wasn't watching. That was the first moment I felt actual fear. Because until then, I could tell myself it was stationary and weird and unexplainable, but still acting like a thing in the world. Now it felt like it wasn't bound by normal movement at all. I hadn't seen it descend. It was simply lower now, closer to the top branches. I walked backward toward the porch without taking my eyes off it. The object remained fixed in the new spot. Still no beam, still no spill of light onto the leaves directly under it. The tops of the trees were black shapes against the pale thing hanging over them, but they should have been silvered, outlined, lit somehow. They weren't. I backed all the way to the steps and sat down without meaning to. More like my knees gave up and I let them. From there, the object seemed almost centered in the gap between two of the taller pines. I checked the time on my phone, 12:18 a.m. The outage had happened only maybe 10 minutes earlier. It felt much longer. I must have looked down for maybe 2 seconds. When I looked back up, the object had shifted again, this time not lower, slightly to the left, same height, same brightness, same silent stillness. That was worse somehow. It didn't dart or glide, it just occupied a new place. I remember whispering no to myself, not because I thought it would listen, but because I needed to say something out loud. The sound of my own voice felt too small in the yard. Then the phone in my hand vibrated once, not a call, not a text, just a single haptic buzz, like when a device reconnects to something. I looked at the screen. Still no service. Battery had dropped from 48% to 12. I stared at that for a second, then looked back up. The object was still there. I thought about going back inside and locking the door. But there was a part of me that didn't want to turn my back on it, and another part that didn't want to be in the house if that click had actually come from inside. So I stayed on the porch. The air felt colder now, but not naturally cold, more like all the warmth had been pulled out of it. My hands were stiff around the phone. I put it in my pocket and immediately regretted not having the little bit of light. The object hovered over the trees for what had to be another few minutes, maybe more. It's hard to say, because I kept expecting it to do something obvious. Rise, drop, blink out, anything. Instead, it just remained there, impossible and quiet. Then I noticed the clouds above it, only a thin layer, barely visible in the gray-black sky, but above the object they looked faintly brighter. Not like the object was shining up into them, more like the air above it had a different tone. I stared at that for a while. There was no shape I could make out, just a subtle whitening in the clouds, like a patch of sky had been rubbed with chalk. And then, without warning, the power came back. Every house light on the street behind me came on at once. I heard the refrigerator kick back in inside my kitchen. The porch light over my head snapped on, flooding the yard in warm yellow. I flinched and threw an arm up to shield my eyes. When I looked back toward the trees, the object was gone. Completely. Not fading. Not leaving. Just gone. The tree line looked ordinary again. Wet, dark, uneven. The yard was lit normally now, shadows where they should be, fence clearly visible, reflections on the wet grass from my porch light. There was no sign anything had ever been over the woods. I stood up slowly and walked out into the yard again, because that felt like the only thing to do. The grass still soaked my shoes. The trees still dripped from the earlier rain. In the restored light, the whole place looked stupidly normal. A yard, a fence, woods. I went all the way to the back fence and stood there, looking through the slats into the open ground before the trees. Nothing. No scorched patch, no broken branches, no flattened weeds, no source of any kind. I stayed out there another 10 minutes, mostly listening now that the normal sounds had come back. Insects again. A dog barking somewhere down the road, the hum of a transformer in the distance. All the little things that should have been there before and hadn't. Later, inside, I checked the photos. They were useless. The still images showed a white dot. The video showed a bright spot hanging above black trees, then my breathing getting faster, then the camera jerking as the porch light came back on. When I paused the last frame before the power returned, the object looked farther right than I remembered. But that could have been my hand moving. I called the power company the next day just to ask how long the outage lasted. They said there had been a localized interruption from 12:08 to 12:26, affecting my street and two adjacent roads. Equipment fault, nothing unusual. I almost asked if anybody had reported anything strange during it. I didn't. A week later, I went out behind the fence in daylight and walked all the way to the tree line. There was nothing there except wet ground, scrub, and a lot of mosquitoes. I still go out on the porch at night sometimes. Not as often, and every time the power flickers now, even for a second, I find myself looking toward the trees before I look anywhere else. Because what I can't get over isn't just that I saw a bright thing hovering there, it's that it looked bright enough to own the whole yard, and yet it touched nothing. I was only out there because the moon looked unusually clear. Not bigger or orange or anything dramatic, just sharp, clean. The kind of night where the air felt steady enough that even at a distance things looked more defined than usual. My name's Leah Morgan. I'm not a professional photographer, but I've been into night photography long enough to have decent gear and a bad habit of stopping whatever I'm doing when the sky looks good. That night I drove out to a small gravel turnout on the edge of a reservoir about 15 minutes outside town. I'd used it before for meteor showers and moonshots because there weren't many lights around and the water opened up the horizon. It was cold but dry, no wind to speak of. The kind of quiet night where every little sound, car door, tripod legs clicking open, your own shoes on gravel, felt isolated. I got there around 10:40. The moon was already up, high enough that I didn't have to deal with tree lines or rooftops. Just a clean shot over the dark water and open sky. I set up the tripod, mounted the camera, switched lenses, and started taking test shots. Everything felt normal. The moon was bright enough that I had to dial things back more than I expected. I took a few shots, zoomed in on the screen, adjusted focus slightly, took a few more. That went on for maybe 20 minutes. I remember the details because nothing weird happened while I was actually there. That's what still gets me. If I'd heard something or seen some huge thing in the sky, it would have been easier in a way. But the whole time I was outside, the night felt completely ordinary. I was alone. No cars passed, no voices, just the occasional splash from the reservoir and a faint metallic ping now and then from the cooling hood of my car. At one point, I stepped back from the camera and just looked at the moon with my own eyes for a minute. It looked normal, bright, a little too sharp to stare at directly for long, with that faint halo you sometimes get around it in cold air. No clouds crossing, no birds, no planes, nothing. That matters because I checked more than once. I always do when I'm shooting the moon. Planes ruin photos. Birds can too, though they usually blur enough that you know what they are. I was paying attention for that kind of thing. I took a series of 10 shots in pretty quick succession, all slightly different exposures. Then I changed position by maybe a foot or two, just enough to reframe the moon a little more centered over the water, and took another set. Still nothing unusual. I packed up around 11:20 and headed home. The whole drive back was quiet. The road was empty. I was more focused on whether I'd gotten anything decent than anything else. I remember feeling pretty good about it, actually. The conditions had been nice, and the preview shots on the camera looked clean. I got home, made tea, and sat down at my desk to upload the files. That's when I found it. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. I was flipping through the images one by one, checking sharpness and exposure, when one of them made me stop so suddenly I actually leaned toward the screen. There was a dark shape crossing the moon. Not a smudge, not blur, not noise, a shape. Triangular. It wasn't massive relative to the moon's whole disk, but it was big enough that you couldn't miss it once you saw it. It cut across the lower right portion, crisp enough that the edge of it looked solid. I just stared at it for a second. Then I clicked to the photo before it. Nothing. Just the moon, clean and sharp. I clicked to the one after. Nothing there either. Back to the first one. Still there. A dark triangular silhouette crossing in front of the moon. I remember actually saying, "What is that?" out loud to nobody. The room felt too small all of a sudden. I zoomed in, that made it worse. The edges weren't soft like a bird's wings blurred in motion. They were too clean. Not perfectly razor sharp, but defined enough that it looked like a solid object caught for an instant. The silhouette had no lights, no visible texture, just a black shape blocking the moonlight behind it. I went back through the rest of the sequence. Nothing before it, nothing after it, just the one frame. That didn't make sense. If it had been a bird or a bat or even a bug close to the lens, there should have been some sign of it in at least one neighboring shot, especially since I'd been firing multiple exposures only seconds apart. There wasn't. I checked the timestamp. The image with the silhouette was taken at 11:07:14. The one before it was 11:09. The one after it was 11:19, 5 seconds on either side. If something had crossed the moon in front of me, it had done it in that window and nowhere else. I sat back and tried to think normally. Bird, I told myself. Maybe one fast enough, angle weird enough, shutter speed high enough that it froze better than I expected. So I zoomed in more. No wing shape, no feather detail, no body shape I recognized, just a dark triangle, slightly irregular, wider on one end than the other, like I was seeing something tilted. I checked the EXIF data again. Fast shutter, telephoto lens, same as all the others. Then I pulled the raw file into a different editor, just in case I was seeing some kind of compression artifact. Same result. I checked the back of the camera itself, same image. I even cleaned the lens out of pure denial, then reopened the file as if that would somehow change what had already been captured. Still there. That's when I started replaying the actual night in my head. I remembered standing there. I remembered looking up with my own eyes. I remembered the moon being completely clear. I did not remember anything crossing it. Not a sound, not a movement overhead, not a sudden shadow. Nothing. I would have noticed, I'm sure of that. Not because I'm especially observant, but because when you're shooting the moon through a long lens, you keep checking it constantly. Your whole attention is narrowed to that one bright thing in the sky. If something dark had crossed directly in front of it, even briefly, I should have seen it. But I hadn't. That bothered me more than the shape itself. I got up and walked into the kitchen, mostly because I needed to move. My tea had gone cold. The house was quiet, everything normal. I came back to the desk and looked again. The silhouette seemed different each time I opened it, though I know it wasn't. Sometimes it looked like a sharp triangle. Other times, it seemed more like a wider shape caught edge on, something bigger than a bird but smaller than a plane. I tried comparing its scale against the moon. If it had been close to the lens like an insect, it should have been softer, more transparent at the edges, distorted in a way that comes from being out of focus. It wasn't. If it had been far away like a plane, I should have seen lights with my eyes before or after. And at that angle, with that shape, I should have gotten more than one frame. I didn't. I spent maybe an hour trying to talk myself out of it. Satellite? No, not against the moon like that, and not with that silhouette. Drone? Maybe, but again, no lights, no sound, and why only one frame? Bird? Closest explanation, but it didn't look like one. It just didn't. Around 1 a.m., I pulled up some old moonshots I'd taken over the past couple years. Birds, bugs, planes. I had examples of all of them crossing moonshots at one point or another. None looked like this. Bugs turned into translucent blurs or weird soft blobs. Birds had wings, even when motion froze them badly. Planes were unmistakable. This was just a shape. I zoomed in so far the moon broke into noise and pixel edges. The dark silhouette held together longer than it should have. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Along one edge of the triangle, the moon's brightness looked slightly warped, like the edge of the object wasn't merely blocking the light, but bending it a little. It was subtle, and maybe it was just an artifact from sharpening, but once I saw it, I couldn't stop looking at it. It made the thing feel less like something crossing in front of the lens and more like something actually present there. I ended up going back out the next night. Same turnout, same gear, same time. The moon wasn't in quite the same position, but close enough. I stood out there much longer than necessary, camera ready, eyes switching between the live view screen and the sky. Nothing happened. No strange shapes, no missing frames, no silence, no movement. Just a normal cold night and a normal bright moon. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. because now I couldn't stop imagining that whatever had crossed that one frame had done it without me seeing it at all. Over the next week, I showed the image to exactly 3 people. One said bird immediately, one said probably a bug. One stared at it for a while and said, "That's weird," in a tone that made me wish I hadn't shown him. None of that helped. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. The file is still on my hard drive in a folder with the rest of the moonshots from that night. Every few months I reopen it, thinking distance will make it less unsettling. It never does. The thing that stayed with me wasn't just the shape itself. It was the gap between what the camera saw and what I saw standing there. I keep coming back to that, because I was looking right at the moon over and over that night and I never saw anything cross it. But something did, and it was solid enough, dark enough, and real enough to leave a clean silhouette in exactly one frame before vanishing from the sky and from memory, as if it had only ever existed for the camera. I first noticed it somewhere west of Amarillo, maybe an hour into the overnight stretch, when the road had gone so empty it felt like I was the only thing moving in the whole state. My name's Shane Doherty. I'd been driving long haul for 8 years at that point, hauling produce east. I knew that run well enough to stop checking the route every 10 minutes. You get used to the rhythm of it. Fuel stop, coffee, radio low, watch the lane lines slide under the headlights until your brain turns it into background noise. It was one of those dry nights where the sky looks bigger than it should. No moon, just stars and flat, dark land on both sides. The kind of stretch where you can see a long way if there's anything to see. I was sitting steady at about 65 when I caught the light out of the driver's side window. At first, I thought it was a tower light. There are plenty out there. You see a red blink or a white point off in the distance, and it stays with you a while, then falls behind. Normal. This one was white, not blinking, and it was low, maybe a few degrees above the horizon out over the scrubland. Bright enough to stand out, but not so bright it lit anything around it. Just a clean little point hanging in the dark. I glanced at it, then back to the road. A minute later, I checked again. Same spot. That wasn't strange yet. Distance does weird things at night. But after maybe 10 minutes, I looked again and realized it hadn't shifted at all. Same position in the side window, same height, same brightness. That got my attention. I checked the mirrors, checked the gauges, then looked back out. Still there. I sped up a little. Not much, just nudged it closer to 70. The light stayed where it was. I remember actually leaning toward the glass, like that would help me understand what I was seeing. The land out there was open, low brush and fencing, nothing tall enough to hide a moving vehicle. If it was a truck on a frontage road or something, I should have seen more than a single light. Headlights, taillights, dust, anything. There was nothing else, just that one white pacing me in perfect parallel. I told myself it was probably a planet low on the horizon or some atmospheric thing. But the problem with that was, I know what stars and planets look like from the road. They don't hold one exact position off your left shoulder for miles while you change speed. I let off the gas for a while and brought it down to around 55. Still there. Same distance, same angle. Like I was dragging it along with me. I turned the radio down until it was barely audible. Some late-night caller show full of static and long pauses. The cab felt quieter right away. I cracked the window for a second, maybe to listen for something, though I didn't know what I expected. Wind came in loud, dry, and cold, carrying that dusty smell you get off empty land at night. No sound from the light. Of course not. I closed the window and kept driving. Over the next hour, I tried every normal explanation I could think of. Tower. No. Another vehicle. No. Aircraft. Didn't blink, didn't move like one. Star. Didn't fit. Reflection in the glass. I covered parts of the window with my hand, shifted in my seat, even leaned over into the passenger side for a better angle. It stayed outside, fixed against the land. That was when it stopped being interesting and started getting under my skin. The thing about long-haul driving at night is that your head can turn against you if you let it. Fatigue sneaks up weird. Distances get strange. Lights play tricks. I knew that, so I started checking myself. I read road signs out loud, checked the time every few miles, ran through my last stop in my head. Coffee at 10:40. Fuel receipt in the cup holder. Ate half a sandwich around midnight. I was tired, sure, but not gone. Not seeing things. The CB crackled once, sudden and harsh enough to make me jump. Breaker 19, anybody got ears? Some guy said, faint and full of road noise. I grabbed the mic mostly because I wanted another human voice in the cab. Yeah, go ahead. He asked about a way station farther east, totally normal. I answered him, and for about 30 seconds I felt ridiculous for being worked up over a light. Then I looked left again. Still there. I asked him, trying to sound casual, you seeing any weird light off north of the road? Long pause, then negative. Just stars. I didn't push it. Maybe he was miles away. Maybe wrong direction. Still, the fact that I could see it so clearly, and he apparently couldn't, didn't help. A while later, I pulled into a rest area, not because I needed one that badly, but because I wanted to stop and see what the light did. I signaled over, took the ramp slow, and kept my eyes on it the whole time. It stayed with me through the turn. That was the first thing that really scared me. Not because it followed the truck. It didn't move. That was the problem. I changed direction, but somehow its position relative to me barely changed. It was still there off to the left, as if the road itself didn't matter. I parked under a dead lamppost and sat there with the engine idling. The lot was empty except for one other rig farther down with the sleeper curtains drawn. I looked out through the side window. The light was still hanging there over the dark land beyond the rest area. Same distance, same brightness. Not approaching, not retreating. I killed the engine. The sudden quiet was huge. Without the truck running, I expected the whole thing to feel more real or less real. Instead, it just felt wrong in a new way. The cab ticked and settled, and outside there was almost nothing. No wind, no traffic passing close enough to hear, just the faint hum of highway emptiness. The light didn't care that I'd stopped. That should have settled something for me, but it didn't. If it had been pacing my speed exactly, then stopping should have changed the angle or distance. Instead, it just waited there like it had always been fixed to some point I couldn't understand. I picked up my phone and took a picture. On the screen, it looked useless. Just black glass and a pinprick of white. No context, no distance, nothing to prove what I was seeing. I took a short video too. Same problem, just me breathing and a little white dot sitting in noise. I got out of the truck. The air was colder than I expected. Gravel crunched under my boots too loudly. I stood beside the cab and looked out over the dark land. The light still hovered there. No sound, no beam, no visible source. And still, somehow, it cast nothing onto the ground beneath it. I stared long enough that my eyes started making shapes around it. For a second, I thought I could see a faint haze or maybe a dark outline, but every time I tried to focus, it was gone. Just the point of light again. I got back in the truck faster than I wanted to admit. The second the engine turned over, the radio came back with a burst of static and some country song I didn't remember leaving it on. I sat there gripping the wheel, watching the light out the side window. Still there. I pulled back onto the highway. It came with me. Hours went by like that. That's the part people get hung up on when I tell it. They think I'm exaggerating the length of time because it makes the story sound bigger. I'm not. It was there across state lines, across fuel stops, across enough highway that the dark outside changed from open land to low hills and back again, and it remained locked in the same place no matter what I did. I sped up until I was pushing faster than I should have. It held. I slowed down behind a road crew pilot truck for 20 minutes. It held. I changed lanes. It held. At one point, I took an exit to fuel at a 24-hour station. I remember the exact place because there was a busted neon sign and a half-asleep cashier with a face tattoo behind the counter. I stepped out to pump diesel and looked around before the nozzle had even clicked in. The light was there beyond the station lot, over a distant stretch of dark field or scrub, hanging at the same angle like it had been waiting while I stopped. That was the point where I stopped trying to understand it and just wanted the night to end. Inside the truck, I started noticing other things. The clock on the dash would seem to lag when I checked it. Not wrong exactly, just like I'd glance at it and have trouble remembering what minute it had been a few seconds before. The radio kept dropping into static on certain stretches, then clearing the moment I stopped paying attention. Twice, I heard what sounded like another truck in the lane beside me. that deep tire hiss and engine growl, but when I checked my mirrors, there was nothing there. Could have been fatigue, could have been road noise echoing off barriers. But stacked on top of that light, every little thing felt loaded. Around maybe 4 in the morning, I hit a long, empty stretch in eastern New Mexico, where the sky was starting to pale just a little at the horizon. Not sunrise yet, just that early hint that the black won't last forever. The light was still there. That made it seem worse, somehow. It should have changed with the sky. Distant lights behave differently as dawn comes on. This one stayed exactly what it had been all night. I started talking out loud just to keep myself steady. Road signs, mile markers, the next town, my delivery time, dumb stuff, anything normal. At one point I said, just go away, and immediately felt stupid, but I meant it. The light stayed. Then, just before dawn actually broke, it did something new. It shifted. Not smoothly. Not like motion. 1 second it was in its usual place, pacing me off the driver's side, and the next it was slightly farther ahead. Same height, same brightness, same distance from the horizon, but no transition between. Like I had looked away, and it had chosen another fixed point. I felt every hair on my arms go up. For the first time all night, I considered pulling over and calling somebody. Highway patrol, dispatch, anybody. But what was I going to say? That a light had followed me for 300 miles and was now a little farther ahead than before? I kept driving. A few minutes later, it shifted again, farther ahead still. Then again. Each time there was no motion between positions, just a new placement, a little more in front of me than beside me. That was somehow worse than if it had started closing distance in a normal way. I remember gripping the wheel so hard my hands hurt. The sky got lighter by degrees. The road stayed empty. The light held one last position ahead and left of me for maybe 10 minutes. Then, as the first real dawn color hit the horizon, it dimmed. Not by getting farther away, not by turning off. It just lost brightness, slowly and evenly, until it looked no different than the fading stars around it. And then it was gone. No streak, no upward movement, no final flash, just gone. The empty space where it had been felt bigger than the light ever had. I kept checking for another half hour. Nothing came back. By full daylight, the whole thing already felt impossible, like something I dreamed while driving. The land looked ordinary. Telephone poles, cattle fencing, low brush, scattered buildings. Nothing in it that could have held light or explained why it never changed distance. I made the delivery on time, signed papers, drank terrible coffee in a break room with fluorescent lights, and felt like I was moving through somebody else's morning. Later, after sleep, I checked the phone pictures and videos. They were terrible. Just a white point against black, sometimes with my side mirror framing it, sometimes not. No proof of the distance problem. No proof it had lasted all night. Nothing that showed the way it sat there like it was tied to me with an invisible line. I still drive nights sometimes. Not as much as I used to. Every now and then, on a long, empty run, I'll catch a light off to the side of the road and feel that same drop in my stomach before I can stop it. Most of the time, it turns out to be a tower or a farmhouse or a plane. But once in a while, it holds its place a little too long, and I start checking my speed, then the mirror, then the window, doing the same math I did that night. And for a few seconds, I'm right back there, with that white light matching me mile after mile, never getting any closer, never falling behind, like it wasn't pacing the truck at all, like it had already decided exactly where I would be all night, and simply stayed there waiting for me to catch up. The fog got thick enough that I had to drop to 20. Not cautious driver 20 either. Real leaning forward over the wheel, wipers going even though there wasn't rain, staring through that narrow tunnel the headlights gave you. The kind of fog that makes everything outside the windshield feel fake. My name's Cole Mercer. I was driving home from a late shift at a distribution center about 40 minutes outside town. I'd taken that road 100 times. 2-lane county highway, open pasture on both sides for a while, then patches of trees, then a few scattered houses closer to town. That night, none of it looked familiar. The fog had rolled in fast. 1 minute I had a clear road and stars overhead, and 15 minutes later, I was basically driving through a white wall. The inside of the truck felt too warm compared to outside. I had the defroster running high enough that the vents were making that constant dry hiss, and the glass still kept trying to fog at the edges. I remember reaching up and wiping the windshield with the back of my hand even though it didn't help. The road was empty. No headlights ahead, no taillights behind, no houses with porch lights cutting through the haze. Just my beams hitting the fog and bouncing right back at me. I was watching the center line because that was about the only reliable thing left. That's when I saw the clear spot. At first, I thought it was just a break in the fog where the wind had shifted it. It was dead ahead, maybe 60 or 70 yards in front of the truck. Perfectly circular. Not huge, maybe the width of a two-car garage if I had to guess, but impossible to miss because everything around it was dense and white, and that one section was just clear. Not clearer. Clear. Like a piece had been cut out of the fog. I slowed down more without thinking. The truck dropped to maybe 15. The engine sounded louder in the silence. In the exact center of that circle was a dim white light. It hung there motionless, not on the road, not off to the side, suspended in the middle of the clear patch like someone had placed it there carefully. It wasn't bright enough to hurt your eyes. It wasn't flashing. It just sat there, pale and steady, a little above the height of my hood from what I could tell, maybe higher. Depth was hard to judge in that fog. I remember tightening my grip on the wheel and trying to make sense of it. A vehicle? No, too still, and there were no other lights. No headlights, no marker lights, nothing. A reflector or sign? Also no. It was hanging in open space. I took my foot off the gas completely and let the truck roll. The circular patch in the fog stayed exactly where it was. The light in the middle didn't get bigger the way it should have as I approached. That part hit me a second later, but once I noticed it, it felt wrong in a way I can't really put into words. I was moving toward it. I knew I was. But the light held the same size, same distance, like the space between us wasn't changing properly. I checked the mirror. Nothing behind me but white. I looked back at the road. The clear circle was still there, and for a second I had the weirdest impression that it wasn't in the fog at all, like the fog was arranged around it. I know that sounds stupid, but that's how it looked. The edges of the circular space were too clean, too even, not the way weather behaves. I reached for the radio, mostly because I wanted noise. It was already on, low, some country station that faded in and out there. When I touched the volume knob, the sound cut out completely. No static, no weak signal, just silence. The display stayed lit, the station number still there, but no sound came through. I tapped it once with 2 fingers, like that would change anything. Nothing. I looked back up. The light was still in the center of that cleared space, steady and pale. The fog around it seemed motionless now, too. I don't mean the whole world froze, just that I stopped seeing any drift or texture in it. The usual shifting and swirling you get with headlights in mist was gone near that circle. It just held. I brought the truck almost to a stop, maybe 5 miles an hour, maybe less. I could hear my own breathing louder than the engine. The defroster. The tires crunching faintly over the roughness in the asphalt. That was all. No wind. No passing traffic, no insects from the roadside, nothing. Then I noticed something else. The light wasn't casting onto the pavement. The road leading up to it looked exactly as dark and wet as the rest of the road. If there was a light suspended there, I should have seen some kind of glow on the asphalt, but some reflection on the center line. Something. There was none. The light existed, but it didn't seem to belong to the road or the air around it. I thought about backing up right there. That thought came into my head clear as day. Just put it in reverse, turn around at the next driveway or pull off, and take the longer route home. But I didn't. I just sat there, creeping forward, looking at that circle and that pale white point in the middle of it. Then the truck rolled into the edge of the fog break. I knew the exact moment it happened because the windshield view changed all at once. 1 second, I was staring at a sharp-edged hole in the fog, and the next, the glass seemed clearer than it had any right to be. I was inside it. The air in front of me was suddenly open. The fog didn't thin gradually. It just ended around the truck. And the light was not as far away as I'd thought. It was maybe 20 feet in front of me, just hanging there. A white orb, not perfectly round, but close enough, about the size of a basketball or maybe a little larger. No visible surface detail, no beam, no shadow, just a dull, self-contained brightness. I hit the brake hard enough to feel the anti-lock chatter faintly under my foot. The truck stopped. The light did not move. I just stared at it through the windshield. The circle of clear air extended past the truck in every direction I could see, like I was parked inside a bubble cut out of the fog. Beyond it, the white wall still stood. It ringed the road, the ditch, even the fence line I could just barely make out on the right. The orb stayed fixed in front of me, hovering over the center line. I remember thinking I should be terrified, and maybe I was, but what I felt more strongly was confusion. A huge, total confusion that left no room for anything else. I watched for any hint of movement. Nothing. The radio was still dead. The engine still running. The instrument lights looked normal. I checked the clock on the dash. 12. Not blinking. Just 12. That wasn't right. I knew it was after 2 a.m. I looked back at the light. Still there. My mouth had gone completely dry. I swallowed and felt nothing happen. Then the orb shifted. Not moved. Shifted. 1 second it was centered above the line in front of my hood, and the next it was slightly to the left, maybe 3 feet over. There was no motion between, no glide, no drift. It had simply occupied a new place. That broke something in my head a little. I actually said no, out loud, like I was arguing with it. The sound of my own voice felt dead in the cab. The orb stayed in the new position for maybe 2 seconds. Then it shifted again, this time slightly higher. Again, no movement. Just a new placement. I had the stupid, immediate thought that I was watching individual frames instead of real motion, like reality was skipping, and it was the only thing not bound to the missing pieces. I reached for my phone with one hand and nearly dropped it. My fingers felt clumsy and cold. No service. Camera opened. I pointed it through the windshield. On the screen, the orb looked smaller and flatter, almost disappointing. Just a white dot in gray air. But as I tried to center it, the screen froze. Not the whole phone, just the camera preview. The orb stayed motionless ahead of me. I lowered the phone and looked with my own eyes. Still there. Then, for the first time, I felt something physical. A faint vibration. Not from the engine, not from the truck. It was in the air more than anything, a low hum you could almost mistake for your ears ringing, except that I could feel it in my teeth and the bridge of my nose. The orb brightened slightly. Not a flash, just more present. And the clear space around the truck seemed to tighten. The fog wall came a little closer, or maybe that was just how it felt. The edges of the bubble weren't visible exactly, but I was suddenly aware of being enclosed. That's when fear finally caught up with me. Not panic. Not yet. Just the clear understanding that I was sitting in the middle of something I did not understand at all, and that normal rules had stopped applying the moment I drove into it. I threw the truck into reverse. The backup camera came on and showed nothing but gray fog behind me. No road, no shape, just grain and white. I took my foot off the brake. The truck didn't move. Not because it had stalled. The engine was still running, still sounding normal. But it felt for one awful second like the tires weren't connected to anything. Then all at once the vibration stopped. The orb went dark. Not faded, not dimmed. It just ceased to be there. At the exact same moment, the fog slammed back across the windshield so fast it felt physical, like driving into a wall of cotton. The radio burst into static loud enough to make me jump, then snapped back to the station mid-song. The dash clock read 2:17, and the truck jerked backward a foot like it had suddenly remembered it was in reverse. I hit the brake hard again and just sat there, breathing. The road ahead was once more nothing but a narrow tunnel of headlights and fog. No circle, no clear air, no light. Just wet pavement and white mist. I shifted back into drive, pulled over as far as I could onto the shoulder, and sat there for maybe a full minute with both hands on the wheel. I checked the mirror, nothing but fog. Checked my phone, signal back, weak but there. The clock on the dash held steady at 2:17, then clicked to 8:18. I don't know how long I'd actually been in that clear space. It couldn't have been very long, but it felt stretched out, like the whole event had taken place in a pocket separate from the rest of the night. I drove home slower than I should have, and I didn't look for shortcuts or alternate routes after that. I stayed on the main road, eyes fixed mostly on the lane lines, trying not to think about circles in the fog. The rest of the drive was normal. Too normal. The radio worked. The fog thinned closer to town. A gas station sign came through the mist like it was supposed to. A cop passed me going the other way. Ordinary things. I got home and sat in the driveway with the engine off for a long time. The footage from my phone was useless. One frozen frame of a pale dot ahead of the windshield and then a sudden blast of gray where the camera unfroze. No proof of distance, no proof of the circle, nothing that captured what it felt like to cross into that clear space and find something waiting in the middle of it. I took that road again in daylight a few days later. There was nothing there but ditch grass, fence posts, and a shallow turn where the road passed a low field. No landmarks that matched what I'd seen. No weird topography that could have explained the fog break. No side roads, nothing. I still drive in fog when I have to, but every now and then, when the headlights catch a patch of clear air ahead where there shouldn't be one, I feel that same cold pressure behind my eyes, and my foot comes off the gas before I even realize I've done it. I noticed it because the water looked wrong before I understood why. I'd been fishing off the end of a small dock on a lake outside town, one of those places that's dead quiet at night, except for frogs, insects, and the occasional fish breaking the surface. My name's Derek Malloy. I went out there a lot after work because it was close, and because night fishing gave me an excuse not to talk to anyone. It was late summer, warm but not sticky, with just enough breeze to move the reeds along the shore. The sky was clear, no moon, but plenty of stars. You could see their reflections scattered in the water whenever the surface calmed down. I'd been there maybe an hour, not catching much, just enjoying the quiet. I had a lantern sitting on the dock behind me, turned low so it wouldn't ruin my night vision, and a small tackle bag by my right foot. My line was out maybe 20 yards. The lake was almost black except where the stars hit it. That's when I saw the bright reflection. At first, I thought a car had come down the gravel access road behind me, or maybe somebody had turned on a flashlight along the opposite shore. I looked down and saw this clean white streak in the water off to my left, sharper and brighter than any of the star reflections around it. It was narrow at first, just a pale line moving with the ripples. Then it steadied. The water around it kept shifting, but the reflection itself seemed too stable, too bright. It had more shape than a normal reflection should have had. It looked like something strong and white was shining from above. So I looked up. There was nothing there. Nothing obvious. Literally nothing. Just stars. Empty sky. No plane, no helicopter, no drone, no bright star in that exact position. Nothing that matched what I was seeing in the lake. I stared up for a few seconds longer than I should have, expecting my eyes to adjust and reveal whatever I'd missed. Still nothing. When I looked back down, the reflection was still there. That's when my stomach kind of tightened. It had shifted slightly with the water, but it was still in the same general spot, bright enough that it didn't make sense. A clean white reflection with no visible source. I reeled in a little by habit, not because I was leaving, just because I suddenly didn't like having my line out there near it. The reel sounded louder than usual in the quiet. Metal on metal, soft but sharp enough to make me wince. The reflection didn't react. It just sat there in the water like a vertical smear of white, broken at the edges by ripples, but somehow still more solid than the other reflected lights. I looked up again. Nothing. I checked behind me, turned halfway around on the dock. The parking area was empty. Trees. Gravel. Dark. My truck. No one else around. I even killed my lantern completely, thinking maybe some weird angle from behind me was causing it. The dock went darker, but the reflections stayed. That made it worse. Now there was even less chance it could be some stray light from my side of the lake. I crouched down a little and leaned over the water, trying to change the angle. The reflection shifted with my position, but not in a way that helped. It was still there. If anything, it looked longer, like a clean, bright object hanging above the surface, just out of frame. My first real thought was that something was in the water, not reflecting on it. In it. Some kind of submerged light, maybe. But that didn't make sense either. This lake wasn't developed like that. No underwater fixtures, no houses on that side, nothing. and the way the white shape stretched upward in the reflection made it look like a light from above, not below. I picked up my phone and turned on the camera. On screen, the reflection looked duller and smaller, which almost made me feel better for a second, like maybe it was just my eyes turning something ordinary into something strange. But when I pointed the camera upward to match where the source should have been, the sky was empty there too. I panned back down to the water. The reflection looked faint on the phone, but still visible. That didn't help. I took a picture, then another. Then, a short video, mostly so I'd have something to check later if the whole thing started feeling like a trick of the mind. The reflection didn't move while I filmed. It didn't brighten or dim. It just remained there, wavering only as much as the small waves made it waver. I stood up slowly and listened. The frogs had stopped. I didn't realize it at first, but once I noticed it, the silence stood out hard. The insects were still going faintly farther back in the reeds, but the close sounds near the water had dropped away. No plop of fish, no frog calls from the bank, nothing. The lake itself sounded different too. Still moving, still lapping against the dock posts, but somehow quieter, less messy. I told myself that was just because I was concentrating too hard. Then the reflection changed shape. Not quickly, it just broadened a little, like whatever was reflecting had turned or lowered. The top of the white smear widened, then narrowed again. I looked up so fast my neck actually hurt. Still empty, no light in the sky, no star bright enough to account for it. Nothing. When I looked back down, the reflection had gone back to how it was before. Thin, bright, too clean. That was the moment I started feeling watched. I know how dramatic that sounds, but it wasn't some movie feeling where the hairs on my neck stood up and I knew something was behind me. It was subtler than that. Just a strong, ugly sense that the source of the reflection knew where I was standing. Not because I could see it, because I couldn't. I stepped back from the edge of the dock and nearly kicked my tackle bag into the water. The zipper scraped the planks and made me jump. I looked across the lake to the far shore. It was just a black line of trees. No cabins, no lights, no movement. Then I looked back at the reflection. It had moved. Not farther away, not closer, just a little to the right, as if whatever invisible thing it belonged to had shifted position over the lake. I froze. There was no visible glide, no change in brightness. It was just now slightly right of where it had been. The water beneath it looked the same as everywhere else, black, faintly rippling, no disturbance. I set my rod down carefully on the dock and stood there with my hands empty. It moved again. Same thing. A small shift. Rightward this time too. I looked up along the path the unseen source should have taken if it were actually above the lake. Empty sky. The stars stayed where they should. No dark shape crossing them. No light between them. No haze, cloud, or shadow that somehow felt even worse than if I'd seen something. A thing you can see belongs to the world, even if it's strange. This didn't. I thought about leaving right then, just grabbing my gear and walking back to the truck. But I had that stupid human urge to understand one more thing before I went. To wait one more second and see if it resolved into something normal. So I waited. The reflection held still for maybe 30 seconds. Then, very slowly, it shortened. That's the only word for it. The white streak in the water drew upward, becoming more compact, as if the light source above the lake was rising away from the surface. I looked up again. Nothing. Back down. The reflection was now smaller and brighter, less stretched by the water. More concentrated. I could hear my own breathing at that point. Fast enough that it was getting in my way. The reflection stopped shrinking. For a second it became almost round in the water. Then the lake surface beneath it rippled in a way that didn't match the rest. Not a splash, not a fish strike. More like the water had tensed. That sounds stupid, but it's exactly how it looked. The small natural wave pattern around the reflection seemed to flatten and pull together, as if something just above it had changed pressure without actually touching it. I stepped backward again, closer to shore now than the end of the dock. The reflection brightened once. Just once. Not a flash, more like a pulse. Then it was gone. Not faded. Gone. The water where it had been turned black again, no different from any other part of the lake. At the same moment, the frogs started up again. Not all at once, but close enough that it felt like someone had lifted a hand off the whole shoreline. A fish splashed somewhere to my right. The usual little night noises returned in a rush that made the emptiness of the last few minutes feel even stranger. I stood there staring at the blank water, waiting for the reflection to come back. It didn't. I looked up one last time. The sky was still empty over that part of the lake. Just stars. Normal stars. I left fast after that. Not sprinting or anything dramatic, but the kind of fast where you stop caring about being quiet. I reeled in too quickly, nearly lost the hook in the dock boards, shoved the rod into the truck bed without breaking it down properly, and threw the tackle bag in after it. Before I got in the truck, I looked back once more. The lake looked completely ordinary, calm, black, reflecting only what it should. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, even though there was no way I could have seen the lake anymore. At home, I sat in the driveway for a minute before going inside, just watching the phone videos. They were useless in the worst way. You could see the bright reflection clearly enough to know I hadn't imagined it, but there was nothing in the sky above it, just empty dark. In the last few seconds of the longest clip, the reflection got tighter and brighter, then vanished. No explanation. I went back to that lake one more time the next week in daylight. I stood on the same dock and looked across the same section of water. Nothing unusual. No buoys, no power lines overhead, no hidden cabins on the far shore, nothing that could have created a reflection with no source. I still fish, but not there at night. And every once in a while, if I'm near water after dark and I catch some bright line trembling on the surface out of the corner of my eye, my first instinct is still to look up and make sure the sky gives me something back. I noticed it because the trees were moving one way and it was moving the other. That was the first thing that made me sit up. I'd been out on the porch for maybe half an hour, just trying to cool off before bed. It was one of those humid summer nights where the house held onto heat, even after the sun went down, and sitting outside felt better than lying in bed staring at the ceiling fan. My name's Luke Hannon. I lived in a small town where the houses had decent yards and you could still see a good stretch of sky above the trees if you sat in the right spot. My porch faced west over a line of backyards and then a patch of woods beyond that. Past the woods was open farmland, and past that, more nothing. It was around 10:45, maybe a little later. Not fully silent outside, but quiet in the normal way. A few insects, a dog barking somewhere far off. Leaves moving in the breeze. That breeze mattered. It wasn't strong, but it was steady enough that I could see the tops of the trees shifting to the right. Not dramatically, just a constant lean and rustle. I was halfway through a glass of water when I caught movement above the tree line. At first I thought it was a bird or a bat maybe. Something close enough to the houses that I'd lose it after a second, but it didn't move like either of those. It was farther out than that, over the fields beyond the woods, just a dark shape against a slightly lighter patch of sky. No lights on it, no flashing, nothing to help define it except motion, and it was moving left, against the wind. I put the glass down on the porch rail and leaned forward. The thing wasn't fast. It was actually moving pretty slowly, just steady and smooth, crossing over the distant tree line in a way that made me think of a balloon at first. But balloons drift with the wind, and the wind was pushing the other direction. I remember glancing at the tops of the trees again, just to make sure I wasn't mixing up the direction. Nope. Leaves and branches still going right. The object still going left. I stood up without really deciding to. From where I was, it looked maybe the size of a fingernail held at arm's length. Not big in the sky, but big enough that it didn't feel like a faraway plane or anything normal. And it still had no lights. That was the second thing that felt wrong. If it had been a drone, I should have heard it or seen some blinking. If it had been a plane, same deal. If it had been something loose in the air, it should have moved with the wind. But it just kept gliding left. I stepped down off the porch into the yard to get a clearer view above the neighbor's roofline. The grass was damp from earlier rain, and it soaked through my socks almost immediately, but I barely noticed. The shape was still there, still moving, still silent. It had this odd quality where it seemed both solid and hard to focus on at the same time. I couldn't make out details, just a dark object with a slightly rounded shape, maybe oval, maybe not. Every time I thought I had a sense of its edges, they seemed to shift a little. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds like that. Then it stopped. Not slowed down, not drifted to a halt. It just stopped. Instantly. 1 second it was moving left, and the next it was fixed in place above the far tree line. That was the moment my stomach dropped. There's something about abrupt stillness in the sky that feels worse than fast movement. Fast movement at least gives your brain somewhere to go with it. Stopping dead like that didn't. I actually looked away and back again because I thought maybe I'd lost my place in the sky. No. Same object. Same spot. Perfectly still now. I looked at the trees again. They were still moving in the wind. The object above them wasn't moving at all. I took my phone out and opened the camera. I already knew it probably wouldn't show much, but I did it anyway. On the screen, the object was barely there. Just a darker speck against dark blue sky, easy to dismiss if you hadn't been seeing it with your own eyes. I zoomed in, and it got worse, breaking into grainy blur. I lowered the phone. With my own eyes, it was still there, still fixed. I checked the time, 10:53. I remember that because once I realized it had stopped, I started timing it without meaning to. I stayed in the yard, one hand holding the phone, the other hanging uselessly at my side. I didn't want to go back on the porch. I also didn't want to get any closer, even though there was no way to get closer from where I stood. That's just how it felt. Like I needed to keep some distance from the whole thing, even if it was far away. The neighborhood around me kept acting normal. A TV flickered through somebody's blinds 2 houses down. A car passed on the road out front and was gone. Crickets kept going in the grass. But every few seconds, all of that would seem to drop out for just a moment, and I'd be left standing there in this weird pocket of focus where all I could see was that dark, motionless thing over the fields. At one point, I thought I heard a low hum. Not from the object exactly, just somewhere. I stopped breathing for a second to listen, but it was gone before I could place it. Could have been the transformer down the street. Could have been my ears doing something weird because I was keyed up. I kept watching. The object stayed exactly where it was. No wobble, no rise, no tilt, just fixed. After maybe 2 minutes, I started noticing how unnatural that felt. Even if something in the sky stops, it usually still does something. It drifts a little, shifts in the air, changes angle. This didn't. It looked like somebody had paused it. I walked a few steps farther into the yard, angling around the old swing set frame we never took down. From that new position, the object lined up differently with the distant trees, but it was still in the exact same place in the sky. That should sound obvious, but at the time I was desperate for anything normal. Some sign that maybe it had only seemed still from one angle. It hadn't. I remember looking up and realizing the stars around it were visible, but it somehow stood apart from them in a way that was hard to explain. Not bright, but present, like it occupied space differently than the rest of the sky. Then another strange thing happened. The air seemed to get quieter, not fully silent, just less detailed. The bugs were still there, but thinner. The leaves still moved, but softer. It felt like somebody had turned down the background and left only the part of the night directly in front of me. I became very aware of my own breathing, of the dampness in my socks, of the phone in my hand getting slippery from sweat. I checked the time again, 10:56. 3 minutes. It had been stopped for 3 minutes and had not moved a fraction. That was when I considered going inside and pretending I hadn't seen any of it. I actually took 1 step backward toward the porch. Then the object changed. Not shape exactly. Placement. It was lower. I didn't see it descend. I didn't see any motion at all. I just looked, and it was now slightly lower relative to the tree line than it had been a second before. That scared me more than anything else had up to that point, because it meant that whatever rules I'd been trying to fit it into weren't just wrong, they were useless. I stood perfectly still and stared at it. It didn't move after that. It just held the new position. A little lower, still dead still silent. My mouth had gone dry. I swallowed and could actually hear it in that stretched out quiet. I looked down at my phone again, more to do something than because I needed the time. 10:57. When I looked back up, the object had not moved again. I don't know why, but I said, "What are you?" out loud. I regretted it immediately. The sound of my own voice felt too loud and too close. It didn't help. The object didn't react. I scanned the rest of the sky then, maybe for comparison, maybe hoping I'd spot another one and somehow that would make it easier. Nothing. Just stars, a few thin clouds low on the horizon, and that one dark thing hanging out there like it had nowhere else to be. A dog barked again in the distance. Somewhere on the next block, a motion light came on, then off. Those ordinary little things should have grounded me, but they didn't. They just made the thing over the fields feel more separate. I checked the time one last time. 10:59, it had been motionless for around 6 minutes. That's what I'm sure of because I watched the minutes change while it stayed fixed in place. Then, without warning, it moved again. Fast this time. Not like a plane banking or a bird darting. It didn't arc, it didn't tilt. It just shot left in a perfectly straight line for maybe a second. Less, maybe. And covered more distance than it should have been able to cover at that scale. Then it was gone. No fading. No upward movement I could track. Just gone into the dark over the fields. I stood there for a long time afterwards, staring at the empty part of the sky where it had last been. The wind in the trees sounded normal again. The insects came back full. A truck changed gears somewhere on the highway farther out, and the sound carried over the rooftops. Everything slid back into place. The neighborhood was the same. My yard was the same. The porch light behind me still attracted moths that bumped the screen door over and over. But that space over the trees stayed empty. I went inside eventually, mostly because I realized I was cold and my feet were wet. I checked the phone video I'd tried to take. Useless. On screen, the object was little more than a shifting, dark speck, and when it finally disappeared, it happened between the phone's noise and my own hand movement. Nothing convincing. Nothing that captured how wrong it felt to see it stop against the wind and just hang there. The next night, I sat out on the porch again, not because I wanted to, more because I didn't want that sky to belong to that one moment forever. Nothing happened. The wind moved the trees. The stars looked normal. A plane passed with its lights blinking, exactly how planes are supposed to blink. I still sit outside late sometimes, and now, whenever something in the sky moves strangely, even for a second, I look at the trees first. Because if they're moving one way and whatever I'm watching is moving the other, I already know how the rest of the night is going to feel. I didn't see it until I got home. That was the part that bothered me most. My name's Evan Mercer. I do photography on the side, mostly landscapes and night shots when I can get away from town. I'm not some expert astrophotographer or anything, but I know my way around a tripod and a camera well enough to know when something in a frame doesn't make sense. That night, everything had felt normal. I'd driven out to an overlook above a wide stretch of scrubland about 40 minutes from where I lived. It wasn't completely remote, but far enough from town that the sky opened up and the light pollution dropped off. There was a gravel pull-off, a rusted fence, and not much else. Good place for stars. Quiet place, too. It was cold, dry, and still. No wind, no clouds that I could see. The kind of clear night where the sky feels bigger than it should. I got there around 11 and set up like I always did. Tripod first, then camera, then I checked framing through the live view. I had the horizon low in the shot, mostly because I wanted as much sky as I could get. Just a thin black strip of land at the bottom and stars above it. I was taking 30-second exposures, one after another, with a few seconds between them while the camera wrote to the card. Nothing fancy, just a series. The first few looked good right away. You could tell from the preview if the focus was off or if something had shaken. These were clean, sharp stars, no light trails, no airplane blinking through the frame. I always watch for planes. That matters, because if there had been something obvious up there, I would have noticed. I kept checking the sky with my own eyes between shots. I even turned around once or twice just to stretch and look across the whole horizon. Nothing unusual. No sounds either. No engines, no nearby traffic, just a couple distant insects in the brush, and that strange outdoor quiet you only get in places where there's nothing around to echo. I took maybe 12 or 13 shots in the first set. Then I shifted the tripod slightly to recenter the frame and took another set. Still nothing strange. The moon wasn't up yet, so the stars were strong. I remember specifically thinking how empty the sky looked in the best way. Clean, no haze, no cloud streaks, no junk. Around midnight, I packed up and drove home. I didn't review everything on the tiny camera screen out there because it's pointless for long exposures. You can tell basics, but not detail. So I waited until I got back, made coffee, and loaded the card onto my computer. The first few frames from the overlook looked exactly like I expected. Then I hit one that made me stop so suddenly I thought the program had glitched. There was a massive dark shape in the sky, not covering the whole frame, but huge. It blocked out a section of stars on the upper right side, stretching inward toward the center. At first glance, it almost looked like a cloud, except it was too dark and too clean-edged in places. It wasn't just dimming the stars behind it, they were gone where it passed. I leaned closer to the screen. The shape wasn't solid black like a pasted graphic. It had slight variation in tone, enough to show it belonged in the image. But it was darker than the sky around it by a lot. The stars ended at its edge. No twinkle through it, no faint points showing through. Just absence. I clicked back to the frame before it, nothing there. Same sky, same angle, same exposure setting, same stars. I clicked forward to the one after. Also nothing. Back to the dark shaped frame, still there. That's when I sat back in my chair and felt that first real drop in my stomach. If it had been a cloud, it would have shown up in the surrounding frames too. Even if it moved fast, not like that, not cleanly appearing in one 30-second exposure and vanishing from the next with no trace before or after. I zoomed in. The stars behind the shape weren't blurred or distorted. They were simply cut off. Some parts of the edge were soft, yes, but others were sharper than they should have been. Not perfectly geometric, not a triangle or anything obvious. More like the underside of something too large to fit in the frame. That's the part I still have trouble describing. It didn't look like one object in the normal sense, more like the photograph had captured the absence created by something bigger than the frame itself. I checked the metadata, same settings as the others. 30 seconds, same lens, same ISO, no accidental double exposure, no corrupt file marker. I opened the RAW file in a different program, same result. I opened the JPEG preview, same result. Then I started trying to talk myself out of it. Lens hood problem, reflection, smudge, insect near the lens. But none of those fit. A smudge would stay in the same spot across other frames. A reflection would likely repeat, or at least show something tied to the light source. An insect close to the lens would blur differently, especially in a long exposure, and it wouldn't blot out stars that cleanly. I went back through the whole sequence around it. Frame before, normal. Dark shape frame, blocked stars. Frame after, normal. I did this over and over, back and forth so many times I started memorizing the exact pattern of stars around the missing section. What really got to me was how normal the rest of the dark shape frame looked. The horizon was steady. The foreground noise was the same. The stars outside the missing area were just as sharp as everywhere else. The camera hadn't moved. The shot itself wasn't ruined. It was just interrupted. I tried remembering exactly what I'd been doing during that exposure. That took a while. Eventually, I remembered I had been standing just off to the side of the tripod, looking up but not directly through the camera. I had maybe taken a sip of coffee from my thermos around then. I remember setting the cup down on the tailgate of the car. I remember hearing a faint metallic click from the tripod settling, or maybe from the fence in the cooling air. I did not remember anything in the sky. That part stayed constant every time I replayed it. Nothing had crossed overhead that I'd noticed. No plane, no bird, no sound. If something that large had blocked that much of the sky, especially in a clear shot of stars, I should have seen something with my eyes. I hadn't. That made me uneasy in a different way than the image itself. It wasn't just that the camera saw something strange. It was that it seemed to have seen something I was standing beneath without noticing. I got up and went back outside. It was stupidly late, but I needed air. My yard looked small and ordinary. Streetlights from 2 blocks over turned the low clouds orange, and the normal world felt almost insulting after sitting in front of that image for an hour. I stood there looking up for a while anyway. Nothing but the usual washed-out suburban sky. When I went back inside, I pulled up one of my old night sequences from a different location and compared them side by side. I'd shot bugs crossing frames before. Birds too, barely visible as smears or wing-shaped blurs. This wasn't that. I zoomed in even more. There were places along the edge of the dark mass where the star field seemed to bend slightly before disappearing. Not enough that I could swear to it. Maybe it was just me seeing patterns, but it looked wrong. Like the stars weren't simply blocked, they were warped at the edge. I hated that I noticed that. I ended up calling my friend Nolan the next day. He knows cameras better than I do, and I trusted him not to immediately go into ghost story mode. I showed him the file without telling him what I thought. He squinted at it for a long time. Then he asked for the frames before and after. I showed him. He scrolled back and forth. "Could be a cloud," he said first. Then he shook his head before I even responded. "No, not if those are 30 seconds apart." He checked the metadata too, just like I had. Then he looked at the sensor cleaning log, the lens info, the shutter count, all that stuff people check when they're trying to prove a camera wrong. He couldn't find anything. He didn't say much after that. Just handed the mouse back and said, "That's weird." That wasn't helpful, but somehow it felt worse coming from him because he's not the type to feed into things. I went back to the Overlook 2 nights later. Same turnout, same tripod, same lens, same general framing. Conditions weren't identical, but close enough. Clear sky, light breeze this time. I stayed longer than I meant to, taking frame after frame and scanning overhead between them like a paranoid idiot. Nothing happened. No dark shape, no missing stars, no weird sounds. Just a normal night. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the original frame feel more isolated, more specific, like something had passed through that one moment and nowhere else. I still have the file. I've sent it to exactly 4 people. Half said cloud. One said maybe an owl very close to the lens, which made no sense to me for a dozen reasons. The last person just stared at it and asked if I'd actually seen anything. I said no. That answer always seems to disappoint people, but it's the truest part of the whole thing. I didn't see anything. I stood under a clear sky, took a series of ordinary long exposures, and one of them came back with a shape large enough to erase part of the stars. No sound, no warning, no second frame to compare it to in motion, just one image. And sometimes that feels worse than if I'd watched some huge thing cross overhead, because if I had seen it with my own eyes, I could at least say it belonged to the same world I was standing in. Instead, it feels like the camera caught a fraction of something passing through mine, and I only found out about it later, alone at my desk, clicking back and forth between one impossible frame and the empty sky on either side of it. I noticed it when I stepped between cars to check a brake line and looked up without really meaning to. My name's Russell Dean. I worked freight as a conductor, mostly overnight runs through long empty stretches where the land flattened out and the hours started to feel strange. That night, we were hauling mixed freight east through open country, nothing but fields, tree lines, and the occasional signal light cutting through the dark. It was sometime after 1 a.m. I know that because I'd checked my watch not long before when we slowed outside a siding. I was on the ground for a few minutes while we handled a routine stop, then climbed back up into the cab with Nick, the engineer. The sky was clear, no clouds, good visibility. As the train started moving again, I looked out the side window and saw a bright white light high above us and a little off to the right. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I figured it was a planet or maybe a bright star in a weird position. You see enough sky on those runs that you stop reacting to most of it. But after maybe 10 minutes, I looked again, and it was still there. Same spot. That was the first thing that got my attention. Not same area, same spot. Relative to the train, I mean, it wasn't drifting behind us or changing angle the way a star should as the track curved. It was just hanging there above and ahead of the right side of the train, keeping pace. I leaned forward a little and looked through the windshield, then back out my side window. Still there. Bright, steady, white. No blinking lights like an aircraft. No red or green markers. No flashing. Just a fixed white point that looked slightly larger than a normal star. "Nick," I said, "you see that?" He glanced up, then back down at the track. "Where?" "Off the right side." "Up there." He looked again, this time longer. "Oh," he said. "Yeah." He said it in that flat way people do when they don't want to sound interested too quickly. "You've been watching it?" I asked. No, just noticed it now. I kept looking at it. We were doing a little over 40 through that section. Not fast, but not crawling either. The track bent gently more than once over the next 15 minutes, and every time I expected that light to finally behave like something normal, it didn't. It stayed in position, not overhead, exactly. Slightly forward and off to the right, like it had picked a place over the train and settled into it. I checked the interior glass, thinking maybe it was some kind of reflection from the control panel, but when I shifted position, it stayed outside. It held against the sky, not the window. The more I watched it, the stranger it got. It didn't seem to cast any glow around itself. No halo, no beam, just a concentrated white point. It's too bright to ignore and too steady to be ordinary. I looked down at the radio panel, then back up. Still there. I checked my watch. 1:26. I remember that because that's when I started timing it in my head. We crossed through a patch of trees where the branches crowded closer to the tracks, and I lost sight of it for maybe 3 seconds. The second we came clear, it was there again. Same place, same brightness. I remember feeling this slow tension start building in my shoulders. Not fear yet, just that sense that something simple wasn't adding up. I asked Nick, "You think plane?" He shook his head without looking away from the track. Too steady. That was exactly it. If it had been an aircraft pacing us from a distance, even that would have changed a little. Speed, position, angle, something. And there should have been lights or sound if it was close enough, or at least some sign it belonged to the same world we were moving through. This didn't. It just watched. That's how it started to feel after a while. Not followed, watched. I sat back, then leaned forward again. No difference. The light stayed where it was. At one point, we passed a lonely road crossing with one of those old signal arms and red warning lights. They flashed hard against the dark as we went through, and I looked back up expecting the white light to vanish in the visual noise. It didn't even seem affected, just held there above us, steady and cool. I got up after a while and moved through into the narrow passage behind the cab to check something in the paperwork compartment, mostly because I needed to break eye contact with it. My skin had started to crawl in that stupid, embarrassed way where you know you're getting worked up, but can't stop it. I was back there maybe a minute. When I returned and looked out again, the light was still there. That bothered me more than if it had vanished. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me had expected it to be gone the second I stopped looking, like it depended on my attention somehow. Instead, it was just there, patient and unchanged. Nick finally said, "You want to know something weird?" I looked at him. "I kept thinking it was going to fall behind on that last bend," he said. It didn't. We both went quiet after that. The cab felt smaller. The radio cracked once with a burst of static, then settled. Outside, the night kept doing what nights do out in farm country. Dark fields, scattered trees, the occasional distant yard light or signal. Everything on the ground looked normal. Only that light refused to behave. Around 1:40, we slowed for another signal check. That was when I thought I'd finally figure it out. I watched the speed drop and waited for the light to overshoot, drift ahead, fall back, anything. Nothing. It matched us perfectly, even at near crawl speed. Then when we got moving again, it stayed with us just as easily. I actually laughed once, short and nervous, because I didn't know what else to do. Nick didn't laugh. He just kept driving and checking the instruments more often than normal. There was no reason to report it. Report what? A light in the sky? They'd ask whether it was interfering with operations. It wasn't. They'd ask whether it was on radar. We didn't know. They'd tell us to keep moving and note anything else. So we kept moving. By then, it had been there at least 20, maybe 25 minutes. I started noticing little things I might not have otherwise. The cab sounded quieter than usual, not silent, just muffled in some way I couldn't explain. The metal noise, the track noise, even the engine had a flattened quality to them, like all the sharp edges had been taken off the sound. It could have been in my head. Probably was. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The light seemed maybe a little bigger now. Not closer exactly, just more present. I tried to judge altitude and couldn't. It could have been high over us or low and far. The scale never settled in my head. We passed another stretch of trees. Lost it. Got clear. Still there. I remember thinking absurdly that it was behaving like a reflection, except it was clearly not one. At 1:51, I checked my watch again. It had been with us nearly half an hour. I sat there trying to stay rational. There had to be a normal explanation, something to do with track direction and visual reference points, some atmospheric effect. I don't know. Enough stars and lights in weird conditions can mess with you, except Nick was seeing it too. That mattered more than I wanted it to. There's a comfort in thinking maybe you're just tired or locked into a bad thought pattern. Harder to do that when the other guy in the cab is glancing at the same thing and saying nothing, because he clearly doesn't know what it is either. At one point he asked me, "Still there?" He didn't even look up when he said it. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. That was all. We crossed a bridge over a narrow river around 2. I know the spot because the water below caught the moonlight sometimes, though not that night. I looked down briefly as we crossed, then back up. Still there. Same place. Same brightness. That bridge was one of the few points where the landscape opened up wider than usual, and for a moment I got a better sense of the sky around the light. It wasn't alone exactly. Stars were visible near it, but the space around it felt wrong somehow. Cleaner. Emptier. I can't explain that better than that. Like the light had its own pocket of sky. I stared too long and my eyes started watering. I blinked a few times and looked away. When I looked back, it was still fixed in place. That was when fear finally showed up. Not because it had done anything dramatic, because it hadn't. Because for nearly an hour, it had stayed exactly where no real thing should be able to stay. There's something about persistence that gets under your skin more than speed or flashes or sudden movement. If something weird happens for a second, your brain can protect you with explanations. If it keeps happening, minute after minute, those explanations start falling apart, and you're left with nothing but the thing itself. At 2:12, I checked because I'd gotten obsessive about the time by then. We hit a straight stretch of track that ran arrow flat across open ground. No trees, no bends, nothing. Just straight rails disappearing into darkness. Perfect chance to watch it cleanly. We did. The light remained above and to the right, pacing us exactly. I don't know if Nick had the same thought I did, but I found myself waiting for something to happen. Not wanting it to, but expecting it. Like it had invested too much time in us to just stay alight forever. Nothing changed. Then at maybe 2:18 or a minute or two after, it vanished. Not dimmed, not shot upward, not moved off. It was simply there 1 second and not there the next. I remember the exact physical feeling of it. The sudden emptiness in that part of the sky, like a sound stopping mid-note. I leaned forward so hard I almost came out of the seat. "What happened?" I said. Nick looked up immediately. The sky to the right was normal again. Stars, darkness, nothing else. We both kept staring for a good 10 seconds, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The cab noise seemed sharper again after that. The radio hiss, the track rhythm, even the engine. Everything ordinary returned so fast it felt staged. I checked my watch, 2:19, nearly an hour. I stayed awake the rest of that run with no problem. Didn't need coffee, didn't need radio chatter. My head was too full. When we hit the yard later and climbed down, I looked up one last time before heading to the office. Nothing. Just normal sky. I almost mentioned it in the break room later, but I didn't. Nick didn't either. We sat there with paper cups of coffee and talked about signal delays and one bad crossing arm like the last hour hadn't happened. A couple days later, I asked him about it in a parking lot, just the two of us. He looked at me for a second, then said, "Yeah, I saw it." That was all. No theory, no joke, no attempt to shrink it into something harmless. I still work freight, still ride night runs. And every now and then, when we're out on a long open stretch and there's some bright point off to the side of the train, I feel that same slow tightening in my chest before I even really identify why. Because I know what it feels like when something in the sky keeps pace too perfectly, too long, without ever once acting like it belongs there. The lantern died first. 1 second it was hanging from the branch over the picnic table, throwing that weak yellow circle over the cooler and the cards and the half-empty bag of chips, and the next it just blinked out. Not dimmed, not flickered, just off. At almost the same exact moment, the speaker I had running low by the fire wet fire went too. Then my phone screen, which had been face up beside me with the time on it, went black. I sat there for a second thinking maybe I'd tripped some weird power saving thing on all of it at once, which didn't make any sense even as I thought it. My name's Tyler Granger. I'd driven up to a little lake campground by myself for the weekend. Nothing remote enough to be dramatic, but remote enough that once it got dark, the rest of the world felt pretty far away. A few campsites ringed the shore, though on that side of the lake only 2 other spots were occupied, and both were far enough down that I could barely see the glow of their fires through the trees. It was a warm night, clear and still. The lake looked black except where the stars reflected in it. I'd been sitting by the fire for maybe an hour, not doing much, just drinking a beer, poking at the coals, listening to music I had low enough not to bother anybody. When everything shut off, the silence hit harder than the darkness. I picked up my phone first and tapped the screen. Nothing. Held the power button. Nothing. I pressed the button on the lantern. Nothing. Then the speaker. Dead. That was the first thing that bothered me. None of them just looked off. They looked empty, like the batteries had been removed. I remember leaning forward and glancing toward the truck, half expecting the interior light to come on somehow when I hit the key fob. I clicked it. No response. That made my stomach tighten a little. It wasn't panic. Not yet. Just the feeling that something simple had gone wrong in a way I didn't understand. The fire was still going, though, so I told myself it had to be some weird coincidence. Bad battery on the lantern. Phone dead, even though I thought I had more charge. Speaker maybe cheap and unreliable. The key fob was harder to explain, but not enough to make me do anything except sit there and think. Then I noticed the glow across the lake. At first I thought it was another campfire through the trees on the far shore, just a pale light between trunks. But as I stared, it got clearer. It wasn't orange. It wasn't flickering. And it wasn't on the ground. It sat low among the trees at first, maybe 10 or 15 feet up. Hard to tell at that distance. Just a faint white glow, steady and clean, too cold in color to be a fire and too soft to be a flashlight. I stood up slowly from the camp chair, still holding the dead phone in one hand. The glow stayed exactly where it was. The far shoreline was maybe a couple hundred yards away, just a dark strip of pines and brush. Beyond that was more forest. No cabins. No road on that side. I knew that because I checked the map before coming out. It was one of the reasons I liked the site. Once the sun went down, the far side of the lake stayed empty. But the glow was there. And after a few seconds, it started moving. Not side to side. Up. Slowly. It rose between the tree trunks without lighting them up. That's the part that got me almost immediately. If something bright is moving through trees at night, you expect light to catch on bark or branches or at least spread around the source. This didn't. The glow held itself together as if it belonged only to whatever it was coming from. I walked down closer to the waterline, careful because the ground sloped a little and the pine needles were slick. The fire behind me snapped once and threw sparks, but otherwise everything felt quieter than it should have. No insects. I hadn't realized it until then, but the usual buzzing from the brush had stopped. The frogs were gone too. Just the lake, lapping softly against the shore, and even that sounded farther away than it should have. The glow kept rising. It moved slow enough that if I'd glanced away for a second, I might have missed the fact that it was moving at all. Just this smooth vertical climb up from the tree line toward the open sky. I remember thinking drone. That was my brain's first real attempt to make it ordinary. But I couldn't hear anything. And if it was a drone, it was either huge and somehow silent or small and much closer than it looked. Neither made sense. I looked down at my phone again and hit the power button a few more times. Nothing. The black screen reflected a little of the firelight from behind me, but no icons, no charging symbol, no vibration when I held the button down. Completely dead. I looked over at my truck again. Dark. Still. No hazard blink, no dome light, nothing. By then, the glow had risen above the tops of the trees. It looked more defined out in the open sky. Not round exactly, but close. Like a pale shape holding itself in one place while still moving upward. The edges weren't sharp. It reminded me of light seen through frosted glass, except there was no glass and nothing around it to diffuse it. I stood there with my shoes half sunk in the damp sand at the edge of the water and watched it rise. At one point, I looked left and right to see if the other campers were reacting. Nothing. No flashlights, no voices, no doors on RVs opening. Either they were asleep, looking the other way, or whatever I was seeing just wasn't obvious from anywhere but where I stood. That thought didn't help. The glow climbed another little bit and then stopped. Or maybe it slowed so much it only seemed to stop. But for a stretch there it just hung over the lake, above the far shore, still and faint and wrong. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale. The air smelled like wet earth and campfire smoke. I listened again. Still no insects. That silence had become its own thing by then, something I kept checking against without meaning to. I crouched down and looked at the glow's reflection in the water. There was one, but it was faint and too straight, not stretching and breaking the way reflections usually do on ripples. It looked like a narrow, pale line laid on the surface beneath it. I remember actually feeling cold then, even though the night wasn't especially cool. The glow didn't brighten, didn't dim. It just held there for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, long enough that my eyes started watering from staring. Then it began moving again. This time it rose faster, not suddenly fast, just enough that there was no doubt now. Up and away from the tree line, carrying that same faint reflection beneath it until the angle changed and the water couldn't catch it anymore. I looked up over it, trying to see if there were clouds or some shape around it. Nothing. Clear stars, no sound, no streak behind it, just that pale object rising like it was on a track. And then, maybe 100 feet above the trees, again, impossible to judge distance right at night, but clearly higher than before, it dimmed, not vanished. Just dimmed slightly, enough that for a second I thought maybe I was losing it against the stars. Then it brightened again, once, like a soft pulse, and after that it kept rising until it got hard to separate from the sky. The final part is the part I replay the most. It didn't shoot off. It didn't blink out instantly. It just kept climbing until I couldn't tell whether I was still looking at the same glow or a star directly behind where it had been. Then I realized it was gone. There was no obvious moment of departure, just a point where it no longer stood apart. I stayed there at the water for a long time after that, listening to the wrongness of the quiet and staring at the empty patch of sky. Then, all at once, the speaker behind me came back on. Not gradually, just music again, low and distorted for half a second before it settled into the song where it had apparently stopped. The lantern snapped on a beat later. Then my phone vibrated in my hand so suddenly I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up with the time and a low battery warning, even though it hadn't been low before. I turned around and just stared at the campsite. Everything looked normal again. Warm firelight, lantern glow, cooler, table, truck sitting where I left it like it had never been dead at all. I hit the key fob again. The truck lights flashed. That almost scared me more than the glow had, because it made the whole thing feel self-contained, like the world had simply paused those pieces while that light was over the lake and then given them back when it was done. I went around the campsite checking things like an idiot. Opened the truck, dome light on, turned the ignition, dash lit up normally. Checked the phone battery, 9%, which made no sense because it had been over 40 when I sat down. The lantern worked too, though it seemed dimmer than before. I looked across the lake again. Nothing there, no glow among the trees, no reflection, no movement. And right on cue, the frogs started back up. One, then several, from different parts of the shoreline. A few insects came back too, thin at first, then steady. It was like someone had unmuted the whole lake. I didn't sleep much after that. I sat by the fire until it was almost gone, phone plugged into the truck charger, glancing across the water every few seconds like I expected it to come back. It didn't. In the morning, everything felt stupidly normal. Blue sky, still water, families at the other sites making coffee and bacon, kids tossing rocks near the boat launch. I almost asked one of the guys a few sites over if they'd seen anything during the night. I didn't. I knew what the answer would probably be. Later, before I left, I walked the shoreline at daylight and looked across to the far side. Just trees. No structures. No road. Nothing that could have produced that light from ground level. The speaker battery was almost completely drained. So was the lantern. My truck started fine, but the clock on the dash had reset to 12. I still camp. Still fish. still bring that same speaker sometimes, even though it glitches now and I don't trust it. But I don't camp on lakes much anymore, and when I do, I keep looking across the water after dark, especially if everything gets too quiet, because I can still picture exactly how that glow rose out of the trees and into the sky without ever seeming to illuminate the world it was passing through. I noticed the shadows before I noticed the light. I was driving home on a county road I'd taken 100 times, the kind that cuts through open pasture and patches of trees with no streetlights for miles. It was late enough that I'd stopped checking the time. The radio was low, the heater was on just enough to keep the windshield clear, and I was mostly thinking about getting home, taking a shower, and going straight to bed. My name's Mason Reed. I'd been helping my cousin fix a fence line on his property, and it ran later than either of us expected. By the time I left, the road was empty. No houses close to the shoulder, no traffic coming the other way, nothing but black fields and the thin tunnel of my headlights. It was cold but dry. No fog, no rain, just a clean, clear night. I came around a slight bend and saw something move across the pavement ahead of me. At first I thought it was an animal at the edge of the road, because the shadows didn't look right. Fence posts, mailboxes, the weeds on the shoulder, everything was casting more than one shadow. That was the first thing my brain latched onto. The shadows weren't stretching back from my headlights the way they should have. Some angled left, some right. Some looked almost straight under the objects. They overlapped each other like there were several light sources hitting the road at once. I slowed down immediately, maybe down from 50 to 30 in just a few seconds. The road ahead stayed empty. No car coming toward me, no truck behind me, no porch light shining from a side road. Just those wrong shadows sliding over the asphalt as I moved. I leaned forward, looking through the windshield harder, like that would somehow make it normal again. It didn't. A road sign ahead had 3 separate shadow edges. The gravel ridge along the shoulder looked shaded from opposite directions at the same time. Even the center line seemed off, like the light hitting it was coming from above as much as from in front of me. That thought made me look up. At first, I didn't see anything because I was still looking through the windshield, and all I got was the dark sky and a few stars. Then I lowered my eyes just a little and caught it in the upper part of the glass. A bright object. Directly above the car, or close enough to feel that way. Not huge in the sky, but bright enough that once I saw it, I couldn't understand how I'd missed it. It was white, almost colorless and steady. No blinking, no beam, no red or green aircraft lights, just a hard white presence above me. I took my foot off the gas entirely and let the car coast. The object stayed there. The shadows stayed wrong. I remember gripping the wheel tighter, my hands suddenly cold even though the heat was still blowing. I told myself it had to be a helicopter, but there was no sound. That hit me a second later, and when it did, it was like the whole moment shifted. Because if something that bright had been hovering that low over the road, I should have heard it long before I saw it. Rotor noise, engine noise, anything. There was nothing. Not just from above either. The whole outside world felt muted. I could still hear my tires on the road and the fan motor inside the dash, but everything beyond the glass seemed flattened. I looked in the rearview mirror. No headlights, no glow behind me, just darkness. I looked back up. Still there. The object wasn't moving with the stars. It wasn't crossing the sky. It was staying over me or tracking me or something close enough to that the difference didn't matter. I tapped the brake lightly, then harder, and pulled onto the shoulder. The gravel crunched under the tires louder than it should have. When the car stopped, the object remained above. The shadows no longer stretched across the road the way they had while moving, but they didn't go back to normal either. The fence posts to my right cast one shadow toward the ditch, and another faint one toward the road. Even the hood of my own car had an extra line of darkness along one edge that didn't belong there. I sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield. The object held perfectly still. It wasn't shaped in any way I could really define. From below, it looked mostly circular, maybe slightly oval, but that could have been the angle. The brightness around it was contained too cleanly. It wasn't lighting up the whole sky. It wasn't washing out the stars. It just occupied a patch above me with this steady, impossible whiteness. I reached over and turned the radio off. The silence inside the car felt immediate and heavy. I listened. Nothing. No wind, no insects in the field, no distant traffic, and still no sound from the thing overhead. That was the moment I started feeling actual fear, not panic. Not yet. Just that cold, spreading realization that the problem wasn't finding a normal explanation. The problem was that every explanation I had needed at least one thing this didn't have. Sound, motion, blinking lights. Anything. I picked up my phone from the passenger's seat and hit the screen. Black. I pressed the side button again. Still nothing. I knew the battery had been above half because I'd looked at directions leaving my cousin's place. I held the button down longer. Nothing. I dropped the phone into my lap and stared out through the windshield again. The object had not moved. I don't know how long I sat there before I worked up the nerve to open the door, but it couldn't have been more than a minute. It felt longer. When I stepped out, the air hit me cold and still. The road looked wrong under the car's headlights and whatever was above me. Shadows pooled around things in ways I couldn't track. The fence wire flashed faintly at odd angles. The grass on the roadside looked flat and silver in one patch, black in the next. I didn't step far from the door. I just stood there with one hand still on it and looked up. The object was lower than I expected. Not close enough to make sense of, but low enough that it felt immediate. Maybe 2 or 3 times the height of a streetlight over a road that didn't have any streetlights. It sat directly over the lane where I'd stopped, bright and steady, like it had chosen that exact point. I squinted, trying to see if there was structure around the light. Any edge, any body attached to it. For a second, I thought I saw a darker shape around the brightness. A kind of smooth underside, but the harder I looked, the less sure I was. It was like my eyes could catch the idea of a shape without being able to hold onto it. The wrong shadows stretched around my boots on the gravel. That detail stuck with me more than it should have. I looked down once and saw my own legs casting faint dark lines in different directions, as if the ground had more than one version of me standing on it. I got back into the car immediately after that, shut the door harder than I meant to. Inside again, I checked the dash clock. 12. Not blinking. Just 12, as if the car thought the day had started over. The engine was still running fine, headlights still on, but the clock was wrong. My phone was dead, and something bright and silent was hanging directly overhead. I remember thinking I should call someone, then realizing that was impossible for at least 3 reasons. I shifted the car into drive and pulled back onto the road. The object moved with me, or maybe stayed with me is a better way to say it. It didn't lead, didn't lag. It just remained above as I eased forward, and the wrong shadows slid along with the car like they were attached to it. I drove maybe 20, maybe 25 miles an hour. Every few seconds I looked up, then back at the road, then at the mirrors. Nothing else appeared. No other traffic, no farmhouse lights coming through the fields, just that empty road and the white thing holding its place over me. At one point, I passed a cattle gate and a cluster of trees close to the shoulder. For a second, I thought I'd lose the overhead view of it. I didn't. The object was still there when the branches cleared, and the shadows under the trees looked even worse than the open road had. Broken lines everywhere, like the leaves were lit from angles they shouldn't have been. Then I noticed something else. The farther I drove, the less I could hear the car itself. Not literally less, maybe, but it felt more distant, as if the sound was happening inside a shell and I was sitting just outside it. The hum of the tires, the vibration in the steering wheel, even the engine note when I pressed the accelerator, everything felt muted and wrong. I started talking out loud without meaning to, just stupid things. Come on, what is this? Go away. Hearing my own voice helped for about 2 seconds, and then made it worse because it sounded flat too, like even the air in the car didn't want to carry sound properly. I don't know how long I drove like that before the object changed. It didn't move away. It dimmed slightly. Not a lot. Just enough that the stars around it became more visible again, and the shadows on the road softened a little. I noticed it because suddenly the fence posts were beginning to look closer to normal. I looked up hard, expecting it to vanish. It didn't. It just held there, less bright than before. Then, without any kind of transition, it shifted. Not upward, not sideways, just somewhere else. 1 second it was directly over the car, and the next it was a little behind and to the left, still above the road but no longer centered. There was no movement between those positions. It simply occupied a new one. That hit me harder than if it had accelerated. I sucked in a breath so fast my chest hurt. The shadows changed with it. Everything on the road suddenly angled differently, as if the unseen source of light had been picked up and placed in a new spot. I pressed the gas. Not all the way down, but enough that the engine finally made some real sound again. The car jumped forward. The object did not fall behind. It held the new offset position for maybe 5 seconds, then shifted again, back overhead. Same thing, no motion, just a new placement. I don't know if that makes sense when I say it like that, but it's the most accurate way I can put it. Watching it felt less like watching something move and more like watching it be updated. I kept driving. At some point, the road dipped slightly into a low area with trees on both sides and a creek crossing. The stars overhead vanished behind branches, and for a few seconds I couldn't see the object at all. That should have been a relief. Instead, I felt worse, because I knew it was still there, even when I couldn't see it. The moment I came out from under the trees, it was visible again. Same position, same brightness it had held after dimming. I looked at the clock once more. Still 12. My phone still dead. Everything else in the car normal enough to keep moving. I stayed that way until I hit the edge of town, where the first streetlight showed up over an empty intersection maybe 3 miles from home. The second that normal sodium orange light hit the windshield, the white object vanished. Not flew off, not faded upward, just gone. The shadows on the road snapped back to one direction. The hum of the tires sounded normal again. My phone screen lit up in my lap with the lock screen and a missed text from an hour earlier, like nothing had happened. The dash clock blinked twice and jumped to 1:47. I pulled over at the first gas station I saw, even though it was closed, and just sat under the canopy lights, staring through the windshield. Nothing above me but stars and the usual washed-out town glow. I got home eventually, but I didn't go straight inside. I sat in the driveway and checked my phone, then the car clock, then the phone again, like I could make the numbers explain something they hadn't been there for. The next day, I drove that road in daylight. Everything was exactly where it should have been. Fence lines, mailboxes, the creek crossing, the bend where I first saw the shadows go wrong, just ordinary county road. No towers, no power lines crossing low overhead, nothing that could have produced light from multiple impossible angles. I still take that route sometimes. Not often. And every once in a while, when my headlights catch a signpost or the edge of a ditch just wrong, and a shadow splits for a second, I feel that same cold rush in my chest and look up before I can stop myself. I noticed it because the sky was just starting to lose its stars. That in-between time before dawn always felt strange to me anyway. Not night, not morning. Colors not fully there yet, shapes coming back slowly. I'd gotten up early because I couldn't sleep and figured I might as well drive out to the overlook a few miles north of town and watch the sunrise like I used to do sometimes when my head was too full. My name's Carter Bell. I was 29 then, living alone, working too much, and doing that thing where you tell yourself you're fine because technically everything in your life is functioning. The overlook was nothing special. Just a gravel shoulder off a county road above a stretch of farmland and low woods. There was a rusted guardrail, a bench somebody had dragged there years ago, and a wide view east over fields broken up by tree lines and one narrow creek that caught light when the sun came up right. That morning was cold enough that I could see my breath when I got out of the truck. The sky was mostly clear overhead, but there was a low shelf of dark clouds way out on the horizon. Not storm clouds exactly, just a flat band hanging over the distant fields. Everything else was still. No wind, no traffic, no birds yet. I sat on the hood for a while with a coffee in one hand, just looking out. There's a kind of quiet you only get right before dawn in open places. It's not complete silence, you still hear little things. a tick from the cooling engine, gravel shifting under your shoe. But the world feels like it's waiting for something to start. I'd been there maybe 15 minutes when I saw the light. It wasn't the whole thing at first, just the ground getting brighter in one very specific place, way off in the distance. I squinted and leaned forward, cup halfway to my mouth. At first I thought maybe it was headlights on a far road, but it didn't spread like headlights. It didn't sweep or move. It was just one pale, bright patch far beyond the nearest fields. So far out, it was hard to judge where the land ended and the horizon began. Then I saw the rest of it, a narrow, vertical line of light, perfectly straight, dropping from the cloud layer to the ground. It looked like somebody had drawn a white line from the sky to the earth. Not wide, maybe the thickness of a utility pole from my distance, but impossibly clear against the dim, blue-gray morning. It didn't glow out into the clouds like lightning. It didn't flicker. It didn't flash. It just connected the cloud base to the ground in one clean, pale column. I put the coffee down on the hood without taking my eyes off it. The first thought I had was spotlight, some kind of searchlight or industrial beam, but it was too far out in open farmland where there shouldn't have been anything like that, and it didn't look like light going up from the ground. It looked like it was coming down. I remember standing there with my hand still on the cup, staring at it, trying to understand what I was seeing before it changed. Because even while I was watching, it felt wrong in small ways. The clouds around it weren't lit up. That part stuck with me immediately. If a beam was punching through from the sky or rising from the ground, you'd expect haze around it, some spread, some glow where it hit moisture. But the line was too contained. The cloud bank stayed dark. The fields around the base of it stayed dark too, except for that one pale point where it touched down. It also didn't shimmer, not even a little, just held there like something solid. I took a step closer to the guardrail as if that would help. Then I checked my phone to see the time. 5:11 a.m. When I looked back up, it was still there. Same brightness. Same impossible straightness. I raised my phone to take a picture, and the camera took a second to adjust to the low light. On the screen, the line looked weaker, almost not there. Just a faint vertical smear if you knew where to look. I snapped 2 photos anyway, then tried video, but it looked even worse there. The sensor flattened everything into dark grain and one pale streak that didn't carry the same reality it had with my own eyes. I lowered the phone again and saw it clearly. Still there. Maybe 6 or 7 seconds had passed by then. That's my best guess because what happened next didn't take long. The column started to move, not side to side. Up. The bottom end retracted from the ground first. That's the only word that fits. It retracted, like someone pulling a line back into the clouds. It didn't fade from the bottom upward the way light usually disappears. It withdrew cleanly, staying just as narrow, just as bright, but shortening rapidly from the ground end toward the cloud bank. The pale patch on the ground vanished first, then the lower half of the line. Then all of it slid upward until there was just a short, bright segment hanging below the clouds. Then that, too, was gone. The whole thing lasted maybe 8 or 9 seconds total, maybe less. I just stood there staring at the spot where it had been. The horizon looked normal again. Low fields, tree lines, dark cloud band, nothing else. No afterglow, no spreading brightness, no sound. That was another part that bothered me. There had been no sound at all. Not thunder, not machinery, not even a faint delay from something happening miles away. Just that waiting stillness before dawn, and then the line gone, like it had never been there. I looked at the phone screen again, hoping maybe somehow the image would prove it had looked more ordinary than I thought. It didn't. The pictures were useless. One showed a faint pale mark if I zoomed in hard enough. The other barely showed anything. The video was worse. I stayed there, though. Part of me thought it might happen again. Part of me didn't want it to. The sky kept lightening the way skies do. The stars went away one by one. Birds started up somewhere behind me in the trees lining the road. A truck passed far off on the county road below, the sound carrying up a few seconds after I saw its headlights. All the normal morning things came back in, so gradually it made that brief column feel even more separate from everything around it. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to fit it into something familiar. Weather? No. I've seen lightning, ground to cloud stuff, power flashes. This wasn't anything like that. A spotlight from the ground, it didn't look anchored right, and there were no visible structures out there. Plus, why would it retract upward? Why would the clouds around it stay dark? Something military? I actually considered that for a while since there's a training area farther south, but this wasn't near there, and again, the shape of it was too perfect, too neat, like it existed outside the messy rules of the rest of the morning. I ended up driving farther down the road after sunrise, trying to line up where it might have touched down. The fields out there were all private land, corn stubble, a few cattle fences, a creek line, one old barn half collapsed near a stand of trees. Nothing obvious, no machinery, no utility crews, no burned patch of ground that I could see from the road. I even pulled over twice and walked along the ditch just to get a better view across the fences. Nothing. Later that day, I showed the pictures to my sister because she's the only person I know who won't immediately turn weird about this kind of thing. She stared at the first photo for a while, zoomed in, and said, "It kind of looks like something. Barely." Then she looked at me and said, "What did it actually look like?" I told her. She asked if I was sure it hadn't been headlights or some farm equipment. I said no because I knew how it sounds. I knew what I'd say if someone showed me those photos and told me the same story. I'd probably reach for the same explanations. But the problem is, I saw it. And once you've seen something, do something that precise, your brain doesn't let go of it just because the evidence is bad. For the next week, I kept waking up early. Not on purpose. Just before dawn, every morning, wide awake. Twice I drove back to the overlook. Nothing happened either time. Normal sunrise, normal fields, same cloud band one morning, gone the next. One day there was fog low over the creek, another day the whole eastern sky was clear. No column, no pale ground patch, no impossible line. That should have helped. Instead, it somehow made the original moment feel more sealed off, more exact. Like I'd stumbled into something that had no reason to repeat itself. A few nights later, I had a hard time sleeping again and found myself standing in my kitchen at 4:50, looking out the window over the sink, even though there was nothing to see but the neighbor's dark yard. I realized then that what had stayed with me wasn't just the light. It was how deliberate it had felt. Not random. Not wild. Not explosive or chaotic. It had looked controlled. That was what kept turning over in my head. The cleanness of it. The way it had touched the ground, held for a few seconds, then withdrawn upward, like someone pulling back a probe or a cable or something I don't even have the right word for. Months passed, and I still caught myself thinking about it whenever I saw low clouds before sunrise. I'd check the horizon automatically. Nothing. Every now and then I'd reopen the photos on my phone, zoom in, and try to convince myself they supported what I remembered. They never really did. At best, they proved there had been some pale vertical anomaly in the distance. But that wasn't the same thing as standing there with the cold air in your lungs, watching a line of light connect sky to ground in total silence. That's the worst part of it, honestly. It would be easier if I'd seen something big, something obvious, something with shape and movement and drama. Instead, it was quiet and brief and almost clinical. A narrow white line in the far distance, appearing just before dawn like it belonged there, then retracting back into the clouds before the morning properly began. I only noticed it because I'd already been staring at that part of the sky for too long. It was one of those dry, cold nights where the stars looked sharper than usual, like somebody had turned the contrast up. I'd driven out to a gravel turnout on the edge of some farmland a few miles past town because I couldn't sleep, and because looking at the sky felt easier than sitting in my apartment listening to my fridge click on and off. My name's Jonah Mercer. I wasn't an astronomer or anything. I just liked being outside at night when things were quiet and far away from people. The turnout sat beside an old irrigation ditch and a line of low fencing. Beyond that, it was just open field for a while, then a dark tree line. No houses close by, no streetlights, nothing except the road behind me and the sky above. I parked, killed the engine, and leaned back on the hood with my jacket zipped all the way up. The metal was still a little warm. The air smelled like dry dirt and weeds. At first, I was just looking generally, letting my eyes adjust. Then I picked out one bright star a little above the tree line to the southeast and used that as a kind of anchor. Not for any reason, just because when you stand still long enough under a clear sky, your brain wants something fixed to return to. I kept coming back to that star. There were brighter ones overhead, but that one sat just low enough that it felt connected to the landscape. It held above a break in the trees, just off the edge of a fence post from where I was standing. I checked the time once on my phone. 12:42. Then I put it face down on the hood and kept looking up. Nothing unusual happened for a while. A truck passed far behind me on the road once, its sound carrying longer than the headlights lasted. Somewhere across the fields, I heard a dog bark once and stop. A light wind moved through the weeds by the ditch, not strong enough to be annoying, just enough to remind me the night wasn't completely still. That star